Hey there, Dark Sleep Radio listeners. Another episode is ready to help you wind down with some otherworldly stories. We're exploring encounters that reach far beyond our everyday world. Tales that might just send a quiet shiver down your spine as you settle in for the night. Before we get started, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and share your location. Where are you listening from tonight? It's always fascinating to know how far these stories travel. Get comfortable. Find that perfect spot where you can truly relax. Maybe it's your favorite chair, your bed, or that cozy corner where you love to unwind. Make sure you're settled in and ready to drift off as we explore encounters with beings from beyond the skies. The summers I spent with my grandfather Walt outside Tonopah, Nevada, were quiet and dusty. His trailer sat on a dry patch of land off a two-lane highway, surrounded by acres of sagebrush. I'd visit during college breaks, helping him fix up the well pump and repaint the deck. Walt wasn't much for storytelling, but he had one recurring tale he'd share in a hushed tone. Walking past the old chicken coop one night, he mentioned something that seemed to weigh on him. About once a month, maybe more, strange lights would appear over the ridge. Not like planes, these were silent, hovering, almost watching. He'd state this matter-of-factly, as if it were just another part of living in this remote landscape. When I first heard it, I chuckled and suggested he might be seeing flares or drones. He simply shook his head and said, "You'll see if you stay long enough." I was 24 that summer, and early August brought intense heat that made metal surfaces untouchable during the day. The nights, however, were different, still and quiet, with distant coyote calls and occasional cars passing on Highway 95. I'd spend late evenings reading or organizing Walt's tool shed. A week into my stay, on a Tuesday night, I understood what he meant. Sitting in a cheap plastic lawn chair by the unlit fire pit, I gazed at a sky scattered with stars like salt on black velvet. That's when I saw it. Initially, I thought it was a distant plane, but something was off. The light didn't blink or move like aircraft typically do. A soft yellow orb, tiny as a pencil eraser at arm's length, just hovered northwest of the hills. I watched for a full minute, then called for Walt. He didn't respond, likely already asleep. Grabbing the binoculars from the back door, I zoomed in. Even magnified, the light remained undefined, not quite solid, just present. The first time I saw them, it was a slow, even pulsing glow. 5 minutes passed, and then another light appeared about half a mile to the left. Exactly the same brightness and size. A third light lowered down and joined the others. They just hung there, completely still, not moving or shifting. I watched them for what felt like forever, maybe half an hour. No sound at all, not even the static buzz you might hear from high-altitude aircraft. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, all three lights vanished within a single second. No dimming, no movement, just gone. Walt didn't seem surprised when I told him the next morning. He nodded like this was old news, saying they'd been doing this for years. "You watch long enough," he said. "They'll start moving. You don't want that." I didn't ask what he meant. A few nights later, I think it was Friday, I went out again. This time, I brought a notebook and a cheap field recorder from school. I sat in the same chair by the fire pit and waited. At first, nothing but stars and desert wind. Around midnight, the lights returned. 4 of them this time, spaced wider apart. One hung a little lower, almost touching the ridge. They were brighter now, casting a faint yellow glow on the hilltops. Judging their height was impossible in such a flat landscape. I hit record on the mic and whispered the time, 12:07 a.m. For about 10 minutes, they hovered with that same pulsing glow, silent. Then, slowly and smoothly, the highest light started moving sideways before stopping. Another dipped lower, hanging right above the ridgeline. Gradually, they all began drifting east, not in a straight line, but circling something invisible. No flashing, no noise. A weird pressure filled my chest, like being underwater. It wasn't fear exactly, just a heavy sensation in my lungs. When they faded, it was different from before. They didn't blink off, but grew progressively dimmer until I couldn't tell if they were truly gone, or if my eyes were deceiving me. I stayed out another half hour, hearing only wind through dry grass and maybe an owl. The next day I played back the recording. My voice announced the time, followed by 30 minutes of desert silence. 2 years after my encounter, Walt passed away. I attended his funeral and stayed in a motel in town. His trailer remained empty, eventually sold to someone planning a solar array, I think. I haven't returned since, but sometimes I check satellite maps of the area. The hills, the road, the ridgeline where I saw those lights, they're all still there. Yet nothing appears in the photos. Just empty desert. Back then, I was living alone about 6 miles outside Amorosa Valley, just off Valley View Road, essentially the middle of nowhere. My nearest neighbor was Dennis, a retired guy living about a quarter mile down the dirt track, the kind of place where you keep windows shut when wind rises because dust gets into everything. It was quiet, too quiet sometimes. My home was an old single-wide trailer sitting on cinder blocks. Nothing special. I'd moved out there after my divorce, drawn by cheap rent and the ability to bring my dog Maisie. Walt didn't want to discuss what happened. When I tried bringing it up once, he simply warned, "Don't look too long. Some things don't like being seen." So I let it go. My last night there, around 2:30 a.m., I woke to a faint flickering through the window. Not a constant flash, but a slow pulse, like distant lightning without thunder. I stepped outside barefoot onto the porch. The sky was clear, stars everywhere. The lights were back, closer this time. Maybe 5 of them, hovering low behind the shed past the chicken wire fence. Not on the property, but close enough to see light glinting off Walt's old rusted tools. They remained motionless, then one tilted, not sideways, but as if facing something. The others followed, not in sync, moving almost organically, seeming to react to something unseen. Then I heard it, a deep thump, not loud, like something heavy landing far off, except nothing shook. It happened just once. Afterward, the lights drifted upward slowly, dimming into the sky one by one. That was the last time I saw them. My dog Maisie is mostly shepherd with some lab mixed in. She's usually brave and has chased off coyotes more than once, which made what happened that night in early September even stranger. I was watching some forgettable TV show when I felt more than heard a low thump against the trailer's back wall. At first, I thought it might be the refrigerator or a rabbit under the porch. When I realized Maisie wasn't at my feet like normal, I started looking for her. I found her wedged deep in the bedroom closet, tail tucked and panting hard. Her ears were flat, and she kept staring upward, tracking something invisible. No treat or leash could coax her out. The room felt oddly warm, with a faint metallic smell like a wet penny. Around 9:45 p.m., I stepped onto the porch to investigate. The air was unnaturally still and heavy, pressing against me despite being dry. Goosebumps ran across my arms and the hair on my neck stood up. Then I heard it, a deep, steady hum coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Looking up, the stars were clear, but a section of sky overhead seemed blurred. Not darker or cloudier, just distorted like heat waves, except it was a cool night. This shimmer, about the size of a football field, hung motionless while the hum grew slightly louder. I stood frozen, barely blinking, uncertain how long I'd been watching. The whole experience was surreal, made even more unsettling by Maisie's uncharacteristic fear. Something was definitely not right that night. The humming vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, cutting off like someone flipped a switch. The shimmer above me flickered, like a faulty projection, and then disappeared completely. Maisie erupted into frantic barking from the closet. I went back inside to find her standing, staring toward the door. She pressed against my legs and I tried to calm her down, but her eyes kept darting to the windows. Sleep was impossible that night. Maisie paced the hallway until dawn, and I left the bedroom light on, something I never do. Whenever I started to drift off, I'd hear that distant humming. But each time I sat up, silence engulfed the room. The next day, I drove into town for groceries and a change of scenery. At the gas station, I ran into Dennis and casually asked about any strange occurrences the previous night. He gave me a cryptic look, muttered something about this time of year, and walked away. A few days later, I noticed my porch thermometer was busted. The needle was stuck beyond the high end, as if it had spun wildly. I tapped it, tried to reset it, nothing. 2 days later, I replaced it. Maisie seemed to return to normal, though still a bit skittish at night. When I took her out in the yard after dark, she refused to step past the porch. She stood motionless, nose in the air, tail stiff, waiting. I didn't push her. Nothing else happened, but occasionally when I'm out late, the air goes unnaturally quiet. It's as if the bugs and night birds are holding their breath, anticipating something passing overhead. I'd had my amateur radio license for about 2 years. I'm no engineering genius, just a tire shop worker in Lincoln, Nebraska, with a passion for shortwave and scanning odd frequencies. In my garage, I'd built a setup with a Yao FT991A and an SDR dongle connected to an old HP laptop. It was my go-to distraction on sleepless nights. During those late winter nights, something strange was happening on the radio. It started in late February, when the weather was caught between snow and rain, everything feeling half frozen. While scanning around 29 megahertz for West Coast skip, I picked up an unusual signal around 29,574. This wasn't like anything I'd heard before. 5 uniform tones pulsed in a sequence, DNN, not digital, not analog. They repeated every 8 or 9 seconds for nearly 6 minutes. At first I thought it might be telemetry or a stuck repeater, so I logged it and saved the SDR capture. The next night, around 2:30 a.m., the signal returned exactly the same. I recorded it again. On the third night, things shifted subtly. The 5 pulses remained, but their spacing tightened to about 7 seconds. The final pulse in each group stretched slightly, as if leaning into something. An unsettling feeling crept in. You know that sensation when you sense someone watching, even though you're completely alone? I kept glancing out the garage windows. Outside was dead quiet, just frozen grass and wind whistling through the eaves. I created a new folder on my laptop labeled 29574-ODD and backed up the recordings on a USB stick. Then I posted the spectrogram and audio clip to a ham radio forum, asking if anyone recognized the signal. An hour later, a guy from Oregon responded. He'd heard similar tones on 29.7 the previous night, but only for 2 minutes. When I asked for a recording, he said he'd check. He never replied. On the 4th night, I stayed up with the recorder set to auto capture. Nothing happened at 2:30 or 3 a.m., so I went inside around 3:45. Then at 4:07 a.m., something impossible occurred. The rig turned on by itself. I'd shut down the software and interface, but the logs showed it powering up, tuning to 29.5748, and starting to record. This time, the signal lasted 14 minutes. The 5 tones had changed again, losing their sharp edges and becoming more organic. They pulsed closer together, almost overlapping, like breathing. When I checked the laptop the next morning, the SDR program was still open. The folder called 29574-ODD had vanished without a trace. I'd checked everywhere, the main drive, backup stick, recycle bin, but found no thing. The timestamp was right there in the session logs, but the folder itself was gone. No system restore point showed its deletion, and recovery software only pulled up old Excel documents from months ago. That night in the garage, I set up differently. With an old Tascam handheld recorder from college, I captured the radio signal without connecting anything to the laptop. The backyard door was open, a blanket wrapped around me. Stars filled the clear sky, Orion hanging directly overhead. Wind drifted softly from the northwest. At 2:38 a.m. the signal came through. The recorder captured 10 minutes before stopping abruptly. Despite a full battery, the saved file was 0 bytes, not corrupted, just empty. Then I heard it, a tone from outside, not through speakers. Faint but distinct, 5 soft pulses emerging from the soybean fields behind my fence. I stepped into the yard, frost coating the grass and shed. Walking 10 steps made the pulsing fade, then return when I stopped. Inside again, morning revealed my radio detuned to 29.5740, its waterfall screen blank with static. Scanning the entire 10-meter band produced nothing. My online forum post had disappeared completely. The Oregon guy's reply? Gone. His username showed no existing account. The next night, I stayed in bed with windows shut and curtains drawn. At 2:30, the tone returned, this time emanating through the house walls. 5 soft pulses, a pause, then 5 more. The road trip from Phoenix to Reno was mostly just for adventure. My girlfriend Megan had booked us a stay in Rachel, Nevada, a place I'd never heard of until we hit the 375 highway. The extraterrestrial highway signs seemed gimmicky, but I expected nothing more than another boring desert stretch. We rolled into the Moonlight Motor Inn around 6:30, just before sunset. The motel was a row of 6 rooms that looked like 70s trailers, parked facing a cracked lot with miles of open desert. An older guy with a white beard and a randy patch handed us a blue plastic key tag. When I mentioned we were heading to Reno, he nodded like I'd said we were driving to the moon. "You kids staying just the one night? That's smart," he said, then paused and looked out the window. "Don't go wandering after dark." I chuckled, assuming he meant coyotes or snakes. Megan didn't even catch his warning. She was already walking to our room. The place was surprisingly clean. Stained carpet, but fresh sheets. A little table, bulky TV, humming mini fridge, and not much else. We dropped our backpacks and walked to the nearby diner as the desert sky turned a brilliant orange. Dinner was basic: burgers, fries, watery coffee. A couple truckers played cards in the back while Patsy Cline looped on the jukebox. Weeks later, strange things started happening. A weird sound began, almost like it was inside the pipes or ductwork. I checked everything mechanical: thermostat, water heater, fridge. Nothing matched. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt like it was waiting. It stopped around 3 a.m. The next morning, I took down the antenna and packed everything into a tote in the garage. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard the signal since. But every night around 2:30, my laptop mysteriously wakes up. The screen stays black, the fan runs for a minute, then it powers down. We were sitting on the curb outside our motel room, beers in hand, when the night sky caught our attention. The heat of the day had softened, and a gentle breeze stirred around us. Stars were emerging overhead, impossibly bright and clear, the kind of sky you rarely see near cities. The Milky Way stretched out like someone had scattered salt across black velvet. We weren't talking much. Megan was pointing out constellations, something she knows far better than I do, and I'd spotted a few satellites drifting past. The silence was nearly complete, broken only by the occasional gusts of wind. Around 9, maybe a bit later, Megan asked about a light low in the southern sky. At first I thought it was a plane, a steady white light with no blinking, but it wasn't moving. We weren't far from Groom Lake, so I figured it might be something from the base, but something felt off. It just hung there, perfectly still. Megan suggested it might be a star, but it wasn't in the right spot and didn't twinkle. Then it started rising, not like a plane taking off, but straight up, smooth and controlled, too fast for a balloon or drone. We both stood up, watching. Then something strange happened. In an instant, the single white dot split into 2 lights, side by side, about a thumb's width apart. No flash, no gradual movement, just a sudden separation. The second light seemed to emerge directly from the first. We were frozen, unsure what we were seeing. The 2 lights hovered for maybe 10 seconds. Then, in a moment that still haunts me, they simply blinked out. Not faded, not flew away, just gone, like someone had flipped off a switch. No sound, no trail, no afterglow. I looked at Megan. She was staring unblinking at the empty sky. "Did you see that?" I asked. But we both knew we had witnessed something extraordinary. The night felt strange from the moment we returned to the motel. Around 9:30, I locked the door, something I never do, and we settled in. The TV only showed static, flickering to a blue screen with no signal. Our phones had no bars, which was odd since I'd gotten texts from my brother earlier at the diner. We left the TV on for some light. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up, standing by the window. She whispered that something was outside. I looked out and saw nothing but dark desert and hills. The security light above our room flickered, which wasn't new. Then I noticed it, a faint glow on the ground, maybe 100 yards out in the scrub. It wasn't like a flashlight beam, just a perfect round light about the size of a softball. Megan said it was moving, and she was right. The white sphere glided silently just above the ground, moving left to right in a straight line before stopping and hovering. I closed the curtain. We didn't sleep. We sat in the blue TV light, quiet. Eventually, the signal returned and a news anchor's voice filled the room, but I wasn't listening. By morning, everything looked normal. The sky was pale blue. The same truckers were still playing cards at the diner. A different woman sat at the front desk, smiling politely as if we'd never met. As we left, I looked back. Nothing in the sky or hills. The TV signal remained strong for the rest of our trip, and the stars never looked quite the same again. I'd worked at Dugway for 4 years. I wasn't a high-level scientist, just a facility tech in the civilian support crew. My job focused on infrastructure, HVAC, electrical routing, pressure systems, and backup power. The base is massive and mostly silent. The facility was a maze of empty buildings and long, quiet hallways where people rarely interacted. Most workers kept to themselves, sharing little personal information even during the same shift. My primary workspace was Sector 3, an older section partially underground with concrete corridors and reinforced doors, devoid of windows. Officially, it was described as a backup command area for potential infrastructure failures, though I rarely saw more than 1 or 2 people using the communications room. No drills were ever conducted. Something peculiar lingered in Sector 3, manifesting as a mysterious phenomenon I came to call the pulse. Every night around 200 hours, a low, deep thump would occur, not loud enough to cause vibrations, but distinctly felt. The first time I noticed it, I was alone in a quiet hallway, checking coolant lines for an old generator panel. Complete silence surrounded me when suddenly, a sigh, Nungle's slow thud resonated, like a 100-pound weight dropping several floors below. It was a heavy, deliberate pressure, not sharp or violent. Initially, I dismissed it as a potential seismic event related to the base's desert location, but when it repeated the next night, I began investigating. Over 2 weeks, I meticulously positioned myself in the same hallway during the 200-hour window. The pulse occurred nightly, always a single thud, sometimes faint, sometimes stronger. Once it even happened twice, 10 seconds apart. This wasn't typical machinery noise. I knew the difference between pump cycles, generator hums, and compressor clicks. This felt organic, reminiscent of a breath or heartbeat. Cautiously, I sought information from Don Merritt, my predecessor who had worked there 6 years before transferring to Sandia. His cryptic email response was a single line: "Stay out of the lower corridor behind panel 17. No explanation followed. Intriguingly, a narrow hallway existed behind that panel, one I'd passed numerous times but never explored, as it wasn't part of my standard route. The panel itself was simply an old electrical component, adding to the mystery. I brought a thermal sensor with me that night, nothing fancy, just a handheld device. My goal was to check if whatever was producing that strange energy or pressure had a heat signature. Standing at the mouth of panel 17 corridor at 158, I noticed the hallway was cold. Typically, the area stayed around 66 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but now it was 60 and dropping, with no moving air. Right on schedule, the pulse hit. The sensor didn't spike in a traditional way. Instead, it rippled like something massive shifted beneath the floor, radiating a temperature difference in a ring pattern. I watched the center go cold. 56, 54, 52, then warm again. It felt like a wave passing through the concrete. At the very edge of the sensor's range, about 20 feet down the corridor, I caught a hint of movement. Just a flicker, a shift in the heat signature. No defined shape or form, just a brief dip in the cold pattern, as if something had stepped across the floor and momentarily blocked the ambient chill. I stood frozen, not breathing, for what seemed like an eternity. Nothing else moved. A week later, I was replacing a pressure regulator feeding coolant to the same junction box. The job should have taken 30 minutes, but something was off. As I tightened the lower coupling, I felt the pulse again. Checking my watch, I noted Vol.33, too early. This time, it wasn't just one pulse. The floor pulsed again at 0146, then at 150. My ears began ringing with a low, metallic tone reminiscent of old CRT feedback. Standing up quickly, I grabbed my flashlight. The air felt different, dense and heavy, like humidity, but dry. My breathing seemed muffled, as if the pressure had shifted. Then I heard them, soft, slow footsteps, possibly barefoot, echoing faintly down the dark hallway behind panel 17. I turned, flashlight raised, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Stillness. The air pressure eased, and the ringing in my ears subsided. I finished the job and left, starting to sleep in my truck during overnight shifts. No one noticed. We barely had supervisors on the night crew, and I still logged all my work. I was stationed at a small radar facility outside Minot, North Dakota, back in 2006. Not the main Air Force base. This was one of those satellite installations nobody really talks about. Just 3 concrete buildings, a perimeter fence, and a bunch of radio towers pointing every direction. Most nights were dead quiet. Snow half the year, wind the rest. I was 27, ex-Navy, working contract as a comms tech. The kind of job where you sit in a chair for 12 hours and maybe get up twice, just monitoring systems, checking logs, keeping everything running. 4 of us on rot, Asian, 2 inside the ops trailer, 2 in the maintenance building. Nights were usually just me and a guy named Cole Varga. He was older, Army background, I think. Quiet type. Never talked about himself unless you asked directly. The first time it happened, I didn't even notice. It was late January around 2 a.m., and we were midway through a blizzard warning. Visibility was crap. I was logging routine static bursts on one of the long-range bands when Cole came in from his smoke break looking weird. He stood by the door, brushing snow off his jacket, and said, "You feel that?" I said, "Feel what?" He looked out the window, then glanced at the wall clock. "Never mind," he said. "It happens sometimes, usually Wednesdays." I thought he was just messing with me. Guys get bored, say weird stuff. Later, I was at Dugway for my last month. A new guy named Bryce got assigned to my shift. Young, sharp, probably ex-Air Force. I didn't say anything at first, but on his second week, he asked if the base had an underground lab. I asked why. He said, "Every night around 2, I feel something in the walls, like a low hum." I didn't answer. The day I left my badge and key card on the desk as instructed. My personal locker was clean, nothing missing. But the paneling on the wall behind it, concrete and aluminum, had faint marks. Not scratches, not writing, just indentations, circular, evenly spaced, maybe 5 in wide, like something inside the wall had been pushing outward slowly. No one ever mentioned it. I moved to Montana after that. Got a job in civil works. No more underground shifts, no more pulses. But sometimes in the early morning, just as the sun's rising, I swear I feel it in the ground beneath my feet, like something deep below is still breathing. Cole had been talking about this strange phenomenon for weeks. Every Wednesday at 2:13 a.m., something unusual happened above the site. He described it as the sky going quiet. Not dark or empty, but quiet. As if everything, stars, clouds, satellites, just switched off for a few seconds. It started after they replaced some equipment in late 2004 with a new tower and dish. One freezing night, I stepped outside to check the tower lights. The cold was so intense it made the hair inside my nose crisp. As I turned back toward the door, I noticed something odd. The wind had completely stopped. Looking up, I saw nothing. No stars, no clouds, no haze, just pure black. It wasn't an overcast sky. It felt like someone had placed a lid over everything. The silence was overwhelming. No tower hums, no snowgrass rustling, not even a buzz from the power lines. It was like being deep underwater, with a crushing quiet that lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Then suddenly, everything returned. Wind rushed back, antennas swayed, and a few stars reappeared. Back inside, Cole just looked up from his coffee and asked, "See what I mean?" I tried to explain it away as cloud cover, but he laughed. "Clouds don't kill EM bleed like that," he said. After that, I started checking every Wednesday around 2:10. The events varied slightly. Once, exterior lights dimmed like a brownout. Another time, I saw a long, flat shape blocking the stars above the far tower, silent and motionless, then vanishing. By March, more strange things happened. Seismic sensors behind the generator shed registered massive pressure spikes, suggesting something enormous passed overhead. No visuals, just that same dead silence before everything returned to normal. Cole logged these events but didn't flag them. When I asked why, he just shrugged and said, "Command doesn't want it flagged." In April, we had a scheduled systems check during this mysterious window. Base wanted a full diagnostic of the dish relays. We were in the ops trailer watching signal returns. At 2:13, all outbound frequencies spiked into the red for about 4 seconds. Incoming signals dropped to 0, a flat line across every band. The screens blinked twice and reset like nothing had happened. Cole leaned back, arms crossed. "That's new," he said. The same night, backup clocks jumped forward by 3 minutes. The main clock stayed the same. GPS sync showed no error, but I watched the digital readouts change. Not gradually, not a glitch, just a sudden shift from 214 to 217. We manually recalibrated them. Cole logged the incident, but no flags were raised. The weirdest part came in late May. Snow was melting in patches, and I'd gotten into the habit of bringing a camera during early morning checks. Using a basic DSLR with night mode, I set up a tripod near the eastern fence, pointing straight up. At exactly 2:12:50 a.m., I triggered a 10-second exposure. After the silence, I checked the shot. Initially, it looked normal, but when I zoomed in, something faint appeared near the center. Not a dot or a streak, but a smudge, like a shadow burned into the image. Long, wide, slightly curved. No lights, no definition, just a presence. Another shot from the same angle revealed nothing. I showed Cole the image the next night. He stared for a long time before saying, "Off any network, just in case." June was my last month there. I'd already submitted transfer papers and told no one outside the site about what I'd seen. Not because it was classified, but because I couldn't explain it. Trying to describe silence to someone who's never heard real silence always ends with a polite nod. On my last Wednesday shift, I went out early. Sitting on the truck's hood with a thermos, I watched the sky. At 2:13, everything stopped. Not just sound, but movement, wind, insects, even slowly drifting clouds paused. Looking straight up, I swear I saw it. Not a shape, but an absence. A part of the sky that didn't match the rest, darker somehow. Then it moved, sliding west silently, and the world came back online. I said nothing to Cole. I simply went back inside and finished my shift. A week later, I was in Seattle working with drones. I was up in the Cascades that night, just outside Winter. The air was dry, with no moon and barely a wisp of cloud. I'd taken the week off work and brought my old camera to a pull-off spot about 10 minutes up Forest Road 37. I knew this location well. There's a small clearing off to the right past the ditch where you can set up a tripod without worrying about headlights. I arrived just after sunset, eating a sandwich in the driver's seat and drinking water while waiting for the sky to darken. Around 9:15, I carried my gear out. Tripod, camera, and cable release. No telescope, just a wide-angle lens for long exposures. My goal was simple: capture the big sky full of stars with the tree line along the bottom. By 10 p.m., I'd settled into a rhythm. 2-minute exposures, reviewing and adjusting aperture. The temperature dropped quickly, probably to the low 50s. The air smelled sharp, pine, dry dirt, a hint of distant smoke. Totally silent, except for occasional bug sounds and tree creaks. Around 10:30, I set up a longer 5-minute shot, hoping to catch a slight star trail effect against the static trees. I clicked the shutter and leaned against my car's hood, zoning out. No wind, just occasional distant sounds like branches cracking. When the timer went off, I checked the screen. The stars looked fine, nice arcs with good separation. But something else caught my eye. Across the upper left quadrant was a blurred looping shape, a light trail like a sideways lowercase cursive E. Too large and bright to be a bug, and unlike any aircraft path I'd seen. Zooming in revealed a single continuous line, almost white in the middle, fading to bluish at the edges. A perfectly smooth curve, as if drawn by a compass. I still have the photo. It's stored on a USB drive, never uploaded. The sea, Amara's long gone. I don't show it to people. It doesn't prove anything, just a blur against a black sky. But every so often, around 2 in the morning, I step outside, look up, and listen. I was out taking photos that night, camera mounted on a tripod, scanning the night sky. The frame caught something strange, a perfect loop, no tapering, hanging in the starry darkness. No mechanical sounds, no visible source. It would have required incredible speed to trace such a precise shape in just minutes. Back at my laptop, I studied the image carefully. The shape was solid and distinct, not a camera glitch or lens flare. Its curvature looked almost mechanical, with consistent brightness throughout. Most striking was how it moved between stars without touching them, like something deliberately avoiding contact. I tried multiple exposures, shifting the tripod slightly each time. Most shots were completely normal, but that first image kept drawing me back. Something felt off, not a threatening presence, but a sense of something close by, like standing near an invisible electric current. A few days later, I showed the photo to Neil, a pilot friend from Yakama. He was skeptical, suggesting it might be a plane, drone, or satellite flare. But the tight spiral didn't match typical satellite movement. Satellites travel in straight lines, not intricate loops. Unsure what to make of it, I eventually posted the image on a photography forum. Responses ranged from lens defects to meteor theories. One suggestion mentioned ball lightning. Most comments were dismissive, but the image continued to puzzle me. That night had left me unsettled. I didn't feel scared exactly, just aware that something unexplained had occurred. The photo remained a mystery, precise, silent, and utterly strange. We were driving out toward Rachel in my dad's old Suburban, making the most of a 3-day weekend. The group was small. Me, my wife Lisa, our 10-year-old daughter Ellie, and my brother Dean, who had flown in from Austin. I'd always wanted to see the black mailbox and maybe camp near the old little alien. Not because I'm into aliens, but because I love remote places and figured the desert would be quiet. We came up from Alamo around noon and got on Highway 375, the extraterrestrial highway. The road was dead as expected, with clear skies and no wind, temperature hovering around 84 degrees. I'd filled up at the Sinclair in Ash Springs, so we were set for gas. In the back, Ellie played a game on my phone. Lisa dozed in the passenger seat while Dean scanned the radio, hunting for a station that wasn't pure static. Right around mile marker 34, something strange broke through the speakers. These weren't music, but voices, quiet, distant, and oddly overlapping. Dean paused and turned up the volume. At first, I thought it might be a foreign talk show, but it didn't sound like any language I recognized. Stranger still, it wasn't confined to one station. He kept scanning, and the sound persisted, fading momentarily before returning. Same tone, same rhythm, as if it blanketed every channel. Then after we passed mile 35, it cut out completely. Total silence, save for static. Dean looked at me and said, "That was creepy." I didn't respond. Since that trip, I've returned to the spot twice. Same setup, same gear, same time of night. But I never captured anything like that photograph again. Every frame has been clean. I even brought a sound recorder once, leaving it running for an hour. It picked up owls, wind, maybe a coyote, but no weird tones, no EMF spikes, nothing unusual. The photo remains on my desktop. I've tried enhancing it, adjusting levels, applying filters, but that only makes it look more artificial, as if I'd added the shape in post-production, which I didn't. The shape is embedded in the raw data, just like the stars, with identical pixel values. It's the only shot from that trip I didn't share anywhere else. I've kept it mostly to myself. Every so often I'll stare at it again, trying to remember if I missed something obvious that night. But I didn't. There was nothing in the sky, at least nothing I could see. We pulled into Rachel's gravel lot behind the inn around 1:30 in the afternoon. A few RVs were scattered about, with a couple from Utah setting up a telescope near the picnic tables. The place felt empty. Ellie ran around the UFO statue while we grabbed burgers. I asked June, the woman behind the counter, about good camping spots sheltered from the wind. She suggested an old cattle turnout a couple miles north with solid ground. By 4 p.m., we'd set up camp behind a small rise overlooking western mountains. A dust trail from the highway was visible, but the road itself was hidden. Hot dogs sizzled on the camp stove as stars began to emerge. No cell service, but nobody minded. Lisa read a book, Ellie played with glow sticks, and Dean and I shared a couple of beers. Then things got strange. Around 8:45, the Suburban radio, which we hadn't touched since lunch and wasn't even powered on, started crackling. Soft voices whispered through the speakers, rising for about 5 seconds before dropping back to silence. "Is someone talking?" Ellie asked. Dean checked the car, turning the key to accessory. The display was black, but audio continued, layered, unintelligible voices with no discernible station. We all listened for maybe 10 seconds before it stopped, as suddenly as it began. Dean shut the door. "That's weird," he said. I agreed, feeling more unsettled than scared. Something about the timing seemed deliberate, always near that highway section. We slept through a slightly windy night. No strange lights, no unusual dreams. The next morning, we packed up, grabbed coffee and Rachel, and started home the same route we'd come. And then, exactly at mile marker 34, it happened again. The engine noise dropped, those overlapping voices rose, and the dashboard display blinked before resetting to 12. Dean hadn't touched anything. We were driving down the highway when something strange started happening. At first, it was just a weird sound on the radio, barely audible. I slowed down to 45 miles per hour, scanning the roadside carefully. Ellie complained her ears hurt. Lisa whispered, pointing out something in the distance. About 100 yards into the desert, a dark, narrow object rose from the sand. It looked like a fence post at first, but something was off. The sun was low and sharp, yet this object cast no shadow at all. Dean tried taking a photo, but his phone screen remained completely black. He gave up after a few attempts. As we passed mile marker 35, the voices vanished. Absolute silence. Then the display returned. Lisa sat quietly, and Ellie began to cry. I pulled over, gave her a Gatorade, and we waited on the shoulder for a while. Back home, everything seemed normal. The radio worked fine, and Dean's phone rebooted during dinner. No evidence remained from our desert encounter. No photos, no recordings, despite Dean's insistence. 2 weeks later, while in town getting water heater parts, Ellie asked if we'd return to the place with the whispering voices. I firmly said no. She seemed relieved. Then she revealed something chilling. When we passed that marker, she'd seen something walking behind the fence line. Not a car, not a person, something else. She described it moving with arms straight down and its head unnaturally low. When I asked why she hadn't spoken up earlier, she said she thought we wouldn't believe her. And she's not a kid who makes things up. I never saw what she described, but I remember other details. The strange shimmer in the mirror like heat without actual heat. And the sound, indescribable yet purposeful. It wasn't random noise, more Ike instructions or warnings in a language I couldn't comprehend. The sound felt directed, focused, as if it knew exactly where we were. I'd done this route countless times before, but this time felt different. I blinked, and suddenly everything was eerily silent. The truck was freezing, not just cool but bone-chillingly cold. No AC was running. My phone and cab lights were dark. When I powered on my phone, the screen showed 4:08 p.m. Something wasn't right. My alarm hadn't gone off, and I never sleep more than half an hour. My wristwatch confirmed the same time, 4:08. Somehow, 1 hour and 27 minutes had vanished. A strange sensation crept over me. It was like waking up in a familiar room that suddenly felt alien. A sharp metallic smell hung in the air, reminiscent of a brand new radiator. Despite checking, none of the lights would turn on. The battery seemed fine, and the engine started normally. I stepped out to stretch, trying to shake off the weird feeling. The sun hung lower than expected, painting the Montana sky in deep orange and pink hues. Walking around the rig, I checked everything meticulously. Trailer doors locked, tires intact, no signs of tampering, yet an unsettling feeling of being watched persisted. Road life teaches you to trust your instincts, that tightness at the back of your neck, that moment of hesitation before turning away from the shadows. I scanned the tree line, about 30 yards from the gravel shoulder. Dense pine and scrub sloped upward toward a ridge. Sunlight barely penetrated the thick foliage. Something was off. The shadows flickered, though no wind stirred the branches. No birds chirped, no insects buzzed. Montana in July had never been this silent. Then I saw movement, low to the ground, just past a fallen tree. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or coyote, but its motion was different, unnaturally smooth. In a split second, it vanished behind a tree stump. Something about its movement didn't feel right. I was driving west on Highway 36 through Kansas just past Belleville. The road stretched out, empty and quiet. Suddenly, something caught my eye near the shoulder. I leaned closer, straining to get a better look. 3 small, pale figures emerged from the trees. They were maybe 2 feet tall, positioned in a deliberate formation. Their movement was unnatural, not walking, but gliding just above the forest floor. No sound, no footsteps. They seemed to move in perfect sync, half hidden by branches. My brain tried desperately to categorize what I was seeing. Fawns? Hikers? Kids playing a prank? Nothing made sense. Their motion was too smooth, too precise. All 3 turned simultaneously, as if suddenly aware of my presence. I backed toward my cab, eyes locked on the woods. The moment I reached for the door handle, my headlights flicked on by themselves, high beams, with no one in the driver's seat. When the lights flooded the trees, the figures vanished. Just empty forest remained. Heart racing, I climbed in, locked the door, and gripped the steering wheel. I didn't want to move, barely wanted to breathe. I'm not easily scared, but I wasn't about to investigate what I'd just seen. After 5 minutes of tense silence, I started the engine. Everything seemed normal. dash readouts, GPS, air conditioning. My phone buzzed, suddenly finding service. No new notifications. I drove 2 straight hours before stopping again. Later that night at a truck stop near I-15, I checked my dash cam. I always keep it running, even when parked. But the footage from that stretch between mile markers 242 and 409? Just static. The file existed, but it was empty. Every other day's recording was perfectly fine. I considered reporting it, but what would I say? I saw some strange figures floating in the woods. It didn't sound credible. So I marked that stretch on my map and made a decision. I would never stop there again. No matter how tired I was, I'd drive an extra 20 miles or push through the night. I still have the dash cam file. Sometimes I replay it, hoping to catch something I missed, a shape, a sound, anything. But it's always just static. Late July, 2 summers back, I was heading home to Colorado after a quick visit to my cousin in Missouri. With an 8 a.m. hospital shift waiting for me, pulling an all-nighter on the road seemed like no big deal. I'd been a radiology tech long enough that these spontaneous trips felt routine. The evening was thick and warm, with a lingering pink glow in the western sky. One of those nights where everything feels soft and slow. I had some snacks, a Red Bull, and music playing quietly as I drove. Past the last gas station in Mono, the landscape transformed into an endless stretch of 2-lane road and flat cornfields. About an hour into my journey, something strange caught my attention. A light appeared behind me, not headlights, but a steady white point with yellowish edges, positioned high up. Initially I thought it might be a plane, but something felt off. The light remained perfectly centered in my rearview mirror, unmoving even as the road curved. 20 minutes passed, and it hadn't changed. Same size, same position. It wasn't behaving like a distant aircraft. Curious and slightly unnerved, I tapped the brakes to see if the light would shift. It didn't. More peculiar still, when I tried looking back directly, the light vanished. It existed only in the mirror. The moment I turned my head, it disappeared, only to reappear when I looked back. A slow, crawling sensation began to build in my gut. The kind of feeling that tells you something's not right before your mind catches up. I switched off the music, listening intently. Just the hum of tires, a whisper of wind, and the occasional rattle of my cooler broke the silence. The road stretched empty in both directions. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. I passed a lone grain elevator with its blinking red light and a forlorn gas station, but nothing else disturbed the vast, dark landscape. I was driving through Kansas late at night. The landscape nothing but endless cornfields and darkness. Around 11:30, I pulled into a small gravel rest area near Norton. Just a simple spot with a metal table under a pavilion and a trash bin. I stepped out to stretch my legs and relieve myself. While standing beside the car, I searched the sky for that strange light. This time it appeared faintly in the eastern sky, hovering motionless just above the horizon. I stared, trying to focus, but something felt off. My eyes kept drifting away, almost as if the light was deliberately resisting my attention. It was strange. I was trying to concentrate, but my gaze would slip away repeatedly. It was like the light was somehow boring, though that doesn't make sense. Back on the road, about 20 minutes later, I caught a glimpse of the light in my side mirror. It was slightly brighter now, still perfectly centered and unmoving. The car began to feel claustrophobic. Every dashboard squeak and tire crackle seemed amplified. The air felt thick, as if we were climbing in altitude, though the terrain remained completely flat. I turned off the air conditioning and rolled down the windows. Something else struck me then. There were no bugs. Normally, driving through Kansas in summer meant a windshield constantly pelted by moths and beetles. But mine was pristine, not a single splatter. When I checked the rearview mirror, the light had grown larger, closer. I tapped the brakes, watching to see if it would shift. Nothing. It remained locked in place, almost like a projection rather than a real object in the sky. I started talking out loud, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. It's just a helicopter, I'd say, or maybe there's a tower I missed. But none of these explanations held up. Helicopters move. Towers don't follow you across counties. I pulled off again near Oberlin at another rest stop. Sitting on the curb, I found an old cigarette pack belonging to my ex and lit up, something I never do. I deliberately avoided looking at the sky, unable to face whatever was happening. After 15 minutes, I climbed back into the car and continued my journey. I worked nights at a communications outpost near Glacier National Park. My job wasn't glamorous, mostly routine maintenance and system checks for a remote station about 6 miles off the main road. The site was surrounded by forest and snowpack, with generators, backup systems, and a single concrete building housing our equipment. My name's Tom Reyes, and I'd been doing this job for just over a year when this happened in late October. That evening started like any other. I arrived just before sunset around 5:45, unlocked the gate, and parked next to the main cabin. The structure was simple: a squat building with a satellite rig, 2 generators, and a 40-foot steel antenna tower. No windows, just padlocks, a motion light, and cameras feeding back to the regional office. Inside was basic: a small kitchen, a cot, storage shelves, and server equipment with blinking lights and humming fans. Around 9 p.m., I went outside to grab a wrench set from my truck. One of the tower fans had started rattling, and I wanted to tighten some bolts. I set my black briefcase-sized tool case on the gravel and got distracted while checking the fixture. Then something happened. For 2.5 hours, something followed me. Not speeding up, not slowing down, just hovering in the same spot in my mirror like it was waiting. I drove to the Colorado state line, hunched down, eyes locked on the road, avoiding any glance at the mirror. The strange weight behind me was impossible to ignore. By the time I got home, it was nearly 4 in the morning. I parked in the driveway and sat for a long time. The sky looked normal. No light, birds chirping. A neighbor's sprinklers kicked on. I never saw it again after that night. I was alone at the site, the only one with a key to the gate and building. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother, and I went back inside to answer it. Maybe 5 minutes passed before I returned outside. The tool case was open, and something was off. Every single tool lay arranged in a perfect spiral on the gravel, from the smallest Allen key at the center to the full-length torque wrench on the outside. The spacing was exact, each tool positioned with surgical precision. No random scatter, no accidental spill. The case itself sat neatly beside the spiral, hinges facing south. I scanned the surroundings. Forest stretched east and north, a slope rising behind the tower. No tracks, no lights. Just the crunch of gravel under my boots and the creak of guy wires swaying slightly in the wind. "Okay, what the hell?" I muttered, breaking the silence. The cameras outside the cabin hadn't triggered, and there was no cell signal strong enough for a remote prank. When I touched one of the wrenches, it felt different, cold and slightly damp, as if it had been out much longer than 5 minutes. The other tools were dry. I checked my phone. 7 minutes had passed. The log computer confirmed my timeline. My last entry about the fan issue was at 9:12, and I'd replied to my brother at 9:19. Everything lined up, but something felt wrong. Calling my supervisor seemed ridiculous. What would I say? So I cleaned up the tools, put them back in the case, and brought it inside. I didn't go out again that night. Around midnight, the generator briefly stuttered. When I checked the monitors, camera 3's feed, the one facing the tower, had vanished. Other cameras were fine. I rebooted the system, and the feed returned, but the footage between 9:15 and midnight was simply gone. No error message, no signal interruption, just a blank, black screen. I had a dash cam running the whole trip, one of those cheap Walmart ones that records in 5-minute loops on a 64-gigabyte card. I bought it mostly for insurance, never really looking at the footage before. But late one afternoon in March, everything changed. I was driving south on Highway 375, the so-called extraterrestrial highway, after stopping for gas and snacks in Rachel. The landscape was typical Nevada desert, long stretches of open terrain, low ridges, barbed wire, and faded warning signs. The sun was low but not yet set, around 5:30 p.m. About 20 minutes past a turnoff, the road gets close to a certain perimeter. Not close enough to cause trouble, but near enough to spot the white pickup truck sitting on the hilltops watching. I slowed down, curiosity getting the better of me. Everyone talks about the camo-wearing guys, and I had time to spare. I rolled by slowly, maybe 30 miles per hour, just observing. A quick glance at the hills, and I thought I saw a flash, maybe from a windshield or binoculars, but it vanished almost instantly. I kept driving. When I got back to work, something felt off. The next morning, I checked my camera and noticed the lens was clean, but the mount had been slightly twisted. Not enough to alter the view, but just enough to suggest someone had touched it and carefully replaced it. I went straight to the Kalispell office after my shift, showing the footage to Charlie, the tech guy. He watched it twice in silence, then asked if I had dropped the camera or reconfigured it. I said no. He asked again. I said no again. He wanted to keep the SD card and offered me a few days off. When I returned the following Tuesday, everything had changed. My old wrench case was gone, replaced with a brand new one. Same brand, fully stocked and arranged alphabetically. The camera had been swapped for a newer model. I never asked who made these changes. Some questions are better left unasked. I pulled into a motel around 8 and grabbed a burger. Later that night, I decided to check the dash cam footage on my laptop, just out of curiosity. What I found was strange. A 5-minute clip from 5:24 p.m. looked completely normal at first. Golden sky, flat desert landscape, power poles passing by. But when the next clip started at 5:29 p.m., something was off. For 14 seconds, the screen was pure black, not fuzzy, not corrupted, just completely dark. No audio, nothing. Then suddenly the video resumed as if nothing had happened. Same road, same desert, same angle and speed. I watched it repeatedly, trying to understand. The transition was impossibly smooth. No digital noise, no jump, just solid black. Every other clip on the memory card was fine, with clean starts and stops and clear audio. This was the only one with a blackout. Oddly, the timestamp didn't skip. It ticked through every second from 5:29 to 5:29:14, and the camera seemed to think it was recording normally. I checked the GPS satellite view. That stretch of Highway 375 was completely open. No overpasses, no tunnels, no tall trees. Just endless sky and low scrubland. What troubled me most was how the scenery remained identical before and after the blackout. Same distant power pole, same road curve, like time had simply paused. I reviewed the surrounding footage carefully. In the segment before the blackout, I noticed something subtle. Around 5:26, the sunlight momentarily dimmed, almost imperceptibly. The shadows on the dash shifted, though the road remained unchanged. After the blackout, at 5:30, the camera picked up a strange low sound. It was hard to describe, like a distant subwoofer hum just at the edge of hearing. It lasted about 3 seconds before fading. Strangely, I hadn't heard it during the actual drive. I was hiking Alal, one near Tikaboo Peak last fall, in late October. Days were still warm, but nights cooled off fast. I'd gone out there to get away for a few days, with no real plan beyond walking, sleeping under the stars, and finding some quiet. I didn't go all the way up the peak to avoid the restricted zone. Instead, I parked a little off Groom Road and hiked a wide loop along the southern foothills, staying clear of the perimeter signs. On my second night, I'd set up camp in a wash, cooked some instant noodles, and climbed a nearby ridge to watch the sunset. The view was incredible, but something happened that I can't quite explain. I drove that whole stretch in one go, never stopping. The odometer looked normal, and my trip log matched the map perfectly. But I kept thinking about the blackout. The next morning, still in Tonopah, I drove back up the highway to the exact GPS coordinates from the dashcam footage. There was nothing there. No marks, no tire tracks, no poles or wires or buildings. Just open dirt, some scrub brush, and a distant fence. I left the dashcam running again and drove the same route. When I watched the footage that night, everything was recorded cleanly. No blackout this time. But while reviewing the clip at 5:29 again, I noticed something strange. A single flash frame, too quick to catch normally. Bright white, overexposing everything like a floodlight had been switched on right in front of the lens. I slowed the video down frame by frame. No shape, no source, just pure white across the entire screen. Then it cut back to normal. This only happened in that one spot during the entire trip. After that, I stopped using the dash cam. I've still got the footage backed up on a drive. Sometimes I think about showing someone or posting it online, but I always decide against it. There's nothing to explain, just a clean 14-second blackout in the middle of nowhere, followed by a flash in the exact same location the next day. If I experienced something unusual, I don't remember. And that's the strangest part. The desert stretched out flat, endless, and bathed in that deep orange light that makes everything seem to flicker. I was perched on a rock, watching shadows crawl across the valley floor when something caught my eye far out on the flats, maybe 8 or 9 miles away. At first, I dismissed it as dust devils or heat mirages. Out here, the heat can play tricks on your vision. But after a moment, I realized it was a convoy. 6 or 7 trucks in a loose line, no lights on, but clear enough in the low sunlight. Big rectangular vehicles with high backs, moving together like military transports with canvas-covered beds. Nothing unusual for this area. Everyone knows what's out here, and if you stick around long enough, you're bound to see some strange government activity. I pulled out my binoculars and started watching. That's when things got weird. First, no dust. In this dry desert, anything moving that fast should have been kicking up a massive trail, but the air behind them was completely still. Second, absolute silence. I could hear the wind against my rock and a distant plane, but not a single sound from the trucks. No engine hum, nothing. The way they moved was unnatural. Perfectly spaced, no corrections, no slight swerves, just gliding across uneven terrain like they were on invisible tracks. I checked my topographical map later, just open desert, no roads. They moved with an eerie precision that almost made me laugh. Near a dry lake bed, they executed this bizarre, synchronized turn, like a ripple moving backward through the line. It was so fast and coordinated it seemed choreographed. Then, in an instant, they vanished. Not sped away or went over a hill, they simply disappeared. One blink, and they were gone. I scanned every inch of the valley through my binoculars. Nothing. No dust, no shapes, no shadows, just empty ground. I stayed on that ridge until the cold drove me back to camp, trying to convince myself it was just a visual trick, some atmospheric illusion. But I knew what I'd seen. I was working the night shift for a private security company out near Fort Wuka in southern Arizona. Nothing glamorous, just perimeter patrol and motion sensor checks for a logistics depot leased close to the edge of the restricted zone. The military base sat about 2 miles to the northeast across a low ridge cutting through the desert. They kept to their side. We kept to ours. That was the deal. This was back in 2019. My shift ran from 8 p.m. until 4 a.m., and I did the whole thing solo most nights. Just me and an old Chevy Tahoe with half-dead AC and a two-way radio that picked up more static than voices. I didn't mind. The nights were quiet, sometimes too quiet. Cameras were set up around the outer fence, but half were either offline or pointed at nothing. We were supposed to do hourly check-ins by radio, but after midnight, no one really cared. I think my supervisor, Todd, slept through half his shift in the trailer office. That night in mid-June was hot. I kept waking up through the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd picture a line of trucks moving like ghosts across the sand. Next morning, I packed up and started heading back toward the truck. I couldn't help checking behind me. Something about the air that day felt wrong. Heavy, like being watched. I don't usually get spooked hiking solo, but this was different. About halfway back, I stopped to eat and rest in the shade of a boulder. That's when I noticed something new. Tire tracks nearby. Not fresh, but not old either. Big ones, dual tread like military vehicles. But they didn't follow any trail. They cut across scrub brush through dips and rises in a line too clean to be natural. I followed them for about 20 yards before they just stopped. No curve, no fade out, no turn. Just ended in the middle of the desert. The ground wasn't disturbed past that point. No footprints, no drag marks, no animal prints, just untouched dirt. I didn't like it. I turned around and went straight back to my truck. On the drive out, I passed one white SUV parked near the boundary signs. No markings, tinted windows. I slowed down out of curiosity, and the driver looked up at me. Just a man in dark sunglasses. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just watched me until I drove out of sight. I haven't been back since. At sundown, the heat was relentless. My windows were down, and a cooler full of ice water sat in the back seat. Around 1:40 a.m., I pulled into a small gravel turnout near the wash, with a broken streetlight overhead. I was filling out a log sheet and listening to a replay of the Diamondbacks game when something caught my eye. A single bright light hung motionless above the Argyle line. At first I thought it was a plane, but it wasn't blinking. Then I wondered if it might be a drone, but its movement didn't match. It remained perfectly still. Suddenly it began to descend, smooth and silent. The ridge blocked my view of the base, but I knew the area well. This object was lowering precisely toward the communication station, the one with satellite dishes and strange radar domes. The same spot where Army personnel had once chased us away during a patrol. I watched the light sink lower until it completely vanished behind the ridge. I waited, expecting some kind of response. A helicopter, ground vehicles, anything, but nothing broke the silence. I picked up the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Over." Todd's voice crackled back, sounding groggy. "Go ahead." "I've got a bright object descending behind Sector C ridge, silent. Looks like it went down just north of the dish array." A moment of silence. Then Todd's response, "Yeah, that happens sometimes. Just log it. Something felt off." I pressed, "Say again?" "Don't worry about it. Write it in the notes. Don't go over there." His tone was strange, not surprised, but rehearsed, like he was repeating instructions he'd heard before. I set the radio down and continued watching the ridge. No sound, no glow, no indication of anything unusual. After about 5 minutes, my Tahoe's dash screen flickered with static. The backup camera blinked on briefly, even though I was in park. The radio went silent. One quick smack brought the feedback, but the game was gone, replaced by dead air. That was enough. I drove slowly toward the North Service Road skirting the base's edge. The gate was locked, as expected. We weren't allowed past the inner fence, but there was a decent view of the ridge near the water tank. I parked there, watching. I pulled into the desert, killed the engine, and everything went still. The heat hung heavy, silent. No movement, just the quiet breathing of the landscape around me. Suddenly, the sensor alarms began lighting up. Not the cameras, they were still useless. But the old metal motion detectors along the fence started pinging, first in Zone 4, then 5, then 6. It was like something was methodically pacing the perimeter just beyond my sight. I stepped out of the Tahoe with my flashlight, scanning the line. Nothing moved, no wind, no animals, yet the sensors kept triggering, steady and rhythmic, almost like deliberate footsteps circling the property. I radioed Todd. "We've got multiple sensor hits along the north line. Something's moving out here." His response came slower this time. "Don't engage. Stay in your vehicle." When I asked about the camera feed, he said there was only static across half the monitors. He repeated his instruction not to approach the fence. That irritated me. I'd been doing this work for a year and had never encountered anything like this. Ignoring his warnings, I grabbed the spotlight from the back seat and walked toward the fence. Still nothing. No sound, no tracks. But the sensors continued their erratic dance. Then, abruptly, everything went quiet. Every zone fell silent, as if someone had flipped a switch. The spotlight flickered in my hand and died. I returned to the Tahoe, windows down, feeling something was off. The air felt wrong, heavy. I kept checking the mirrors, seeing nothing. Around 2:30, the radios unexpectedly crackled back to life. Static first, then voices. The dash showed everything was normal again. I completed one final property loop before heading to the trailer. Todd was already packing up when I entered. He looked distracted, no longer tired. I described everything, the sensor activity, the equipment's behavior. He didn't take notes, just nodded and said cryptically, "They don't tell us everything." 6 months later, I left that job. I never saw that light again. It was around 9 at night, driving east on Highway 375, the extraterrestrial highway. I was heading from Tonapa to Caliente, tasked with picking up a backup generator for the cell tower I maintained. The company didn't want to pay for delivery, offering overtime if I used the work truck and kept receipts. It wasn't ideal, but I needed the extra money. I'd driven that route plenty of times before. The stretch near Rachel, where the highway curves gently between low hills, is usually quiet, with nothing but sagebrush and gravel on both sides. On clear nights, the lights from Groom Lake glow softly behind the mountains, a faint haze without towers or blinking red beacons. This particular night, I was a few miles past the black mailbox turnoff, listening to a baseball game crackling on the AM radio. Stars dotted the sky, and my headlights occasionally caught a rabbit darting across the road. I hadn't seen another vehicle in nearly half an hour. Then I came around a bend with a small pull-off and a faded cattle guard. That's when I noticed something strange. A road that definitely hadn't been there before. This was fresh pavement, black top so pristine it still had chalk lines along the edges. No gravel shoulder, no cracked edges, just a perfectly smooth lane, maybe 2 car widths wide, leading northwest into the hills. No signs, no markers. It wasn't on any map or GPS, and I knew for certain it hadn't existed a month earlier. I slowed down automatically, backed up, and studied it carefully. The lane disappeared into a shallow rise, curving around the first set of hills. But it didn't look like a construction zone. No cones, no lights, not even tire marks. Something felt off. There was no logical reason to build a road out here. I'd seen plenty of BLM access roads and service trails, and this wasn't one of those. This was real, smooth asphalt, dark and clean as if it had been laid just days ago. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo through the windshield. Checking the GPS again confirmed my suspicion. Just a blank spot where the road should be. For a moment, I considered following it, pure curiosity. But something held me back. Not fear, exactly, but a strange hesitation. Instead, I decided to loop around and return, thinking maybe I was tired or experiencing some kind of optical illusion. I checked my mirrors, turned around slowly, and headed back the way I'd come. About half a mile down, I circled back to the same spot. The road was gone, not hidden or overgrown, simply gone. Just flat highway, exactly as it had been before. I was out behind my house around midnight, like most clear nights that year. After moving to Green Springs, I'd fallen hard into amateur astronomy. There wasn't much else to do out there besides stargaze and fix things that seemed too new to be breaking down. The skies were some of the darkest in the state. No light pollution, just endless stars. It was the one thing I truly appreciated about that isolated place. A week earlier, I'd been driving a route I knew well, hauling a generator to the equipment depot in Caliente. Something strange happened on that stretch near Groom Lake. I was cruising along the desert shoulder when something felt off. The familiar landscape had changed, or maybe it hadn't. I slowed to a crawl, flipping on high beams, driving past a specific spot multiple times. The cattle guard was back, rusty and half-buried, exactly where I remembered it from years ago. But during a previous trip, a new road had cut across this section, seemingly paving right over where the guard should have been. Now it was like that road had never existed. Parking the truck, I got out with a flashlight and walked around, searching for fresh tire marks or a cut fence, anything that might explain what I'd seen. The ground was dry and crusted, undisturbed for years. No loose gravel, no sign of construction. Back in the truck, I checked the photo I'd taken. It was just black, not a corrupted file, but a dark image where I could barely make out my dashboard and windshield corner. Outside the glass was pure void. No road, no headlights reflecting off asphalt. My stomach dropped. I sat with the engine running, flipping between maps and satellite views. Nothing showed any new roads. That highway section hadn't been updated in years. I drove the rest of the way to Caliente without stopping. At the depot, I asked Paul, the guy on duty, if he knew about any new construction near Groom Lake. He just laughed and said, "Out there, they don't tell us squat." I kept the details to myself, telling my supervisor the drive was fine. A week later, I drove the same route again, same highway, same time of night. I slowed down early, carefully checking both sides of the road. No new signs, no cuts in the fencing, no unexpected pavement. I never saw that road again. The night was bone dry, the air perfectly still. Not a single pine on the ridgeline swayed, and the crickets had fallen silent, something I'd only realized later. I was out on the back deck, facing south, doing some casual stargazing. Nothing serious, just scanning for double stars and messing around. My red flashlight clipped to my hoodie. I was leaning over the telescope when something caught my eye. Not through the eyepiece, but in the sky itself. Near DB, a patch looked off. At first, I thought maybe a low cloud or high-altitude haze, but the weather had been clear all week. The stars weren't dim. They were simply gone, like someone had taken an eraser to that section of sky. This wasn't a typical cloud shape. It was a clean, long, horizontal oval, blacker than black. No shimmer, no glow, just a solid cutout moving slowly left to right across the sky. I blinked several times, checking my vision. The shape moved silently, steady as anything. No lights, no trail, just this dark form blotting out the densest part of the Milky Way, as if it didn't belong. Stepping away from the telescope, I stood at the deck's edge for a better view. Whatever this was, it reflected nothing. Not starlight, not ambient horizon light. It was like staring into a hole in space. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Something felt wrong. Not frightening exactly, but a pressure in my chest made me want to freeze. Then it paused, mid-glide, just stopped. That's when the silence struck me. No insects, no rustling, no distant dog barks from houses down the slope. Just a blanket of quiet and a weird hum in my ears, like standing up too quickly. The blackout shape hovered for about 10 seconds, then shifted. Not forward or down like a plane or balloon, but repositioned in a way that defied explanation. It was as if the space around it changed, not the object itself. It stayed low for maybe 5 seconds, then started gliding again. This time toward me, slowly, still silent. It was a bone-dry Friday night in late August, still warm after sunset. Jordan and I had driven up from Hawthorne to do some night fishing at a small side pond near Walker Lake. The pond sits in an old floodplain south of the lake, part of a dry lake bed that's usually just cracked mud and weeds. But that spring's snowmelt had filled it with enough water to stock a few brown trout. We arrived just after 9 p.m. under a full moon, with skies clear as glass. A week earlier, something strange had happened. I'd been standing in my kitchen doorway, staring through the screen at a massive shadowy shape moving above the ridge. It was hard to gauge its size without any reference points, maybe as big as a football field. My neighbor's dog, Maisie, started barking 2 houses over, then suddenly went silent mid-bark. Seconds later, the power cut out. The fridge clicked off and the porch light died, leaving me in complete darkness save for the starry sky. When I stepped out again, my eyes adjusted to see the massive shape right beside me, about 100 feet up, lower than any plane should fly. No sound, no wind. The thing moved oddly, not flying but changing position. It shifted back toward the ridge, rising vertically as if finishing some unknown task. I watched it blend back into the starry sky, disappearing completely. Moments later, power returned. The fridge hummed, and crickets erupted in song. The next morning, I checked local weather logs, hoping for a rational explanation. Nothing. The skies had been completely clear. My trail camera footage showed only static between 12:02 and 12:11 a.m. For a week, I avoided going outside, unable to look up. When I finally did venture out with Jordan that night, everything seemed normal. The full moon illuminated the landscape, and the pond reflected the sky like a mirror. We set up our fishing gear, unaware of what might be watching from above. We were just fishing. Nothing special. The night stretched out around us, silent but tense. Salt bush and tumbleweeds surrounded a shallow pool, with mountains looming in every direction. I could see everything clearly, even without a flashlight. The desert air felt strange, flat and hollow, like something was listening. Jordan set up a small folding table with beer and snacks while I prepared the fishing rods. We weren't planning to stay long, maybe until midnight. The first hour went normally. We caught a few small fish and released them, chatting about nothing in particular. A weird smell drifted through the air, something like burnt dust or hot plastic. I didn't think much of it. That area is close to an old army depot, and chemical odors aren't uncommon when the wind shifts. Then everything changed. Around 10:45, Jordan pointed behind me and asked, "What are those?" When I turned, 5 perfectly round white lights hung motionless in the western sky. They were lined up horizontally, evenly spaced, absolutely still. No blinking, no movement, no sound. Just 5 precise dots against the darkness, like someone had punched clean holes in the night. Initially, I thought they might be flares, but they weren't drifting. No smoke trails, no flickering. They hovered too high for helicopters, but lower than satellites, just suspended in a quiet shelf of sky above the mountains. We watched, waiting for some explanation. My phone had no service, which wasn't unusual out here. When I tried to take a picture, the screen stayed black. Then, without warning, the lights began to vanish. The leftmost light simply winked out. 3 seconds later, the next one disappeared. Then the third, then the fourth, each vanishing with the same precise pause between them. When the final light went dark, the sky looked exactly as it had before. No trails, no afterglow, nothing. It was like they'd never existed. We sat in silence, each waiting for a logical explanation. But there was none. No clouds, no movement. Jordan finally spoke. That wasn't normal. I could only agree. Wednesday in late April, cool and dry. I just finished a string of night shifts and finally had a few days to myself. My destination, the Kaibab Plateau, on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. Up here it's different. Tall pines stretch overhead, the sky feels massive, and you get the sense you've stepped outside the normal world. I'd been exploring forest roads all morning, hunting for an old fire break trail someone online mentioned. Supposedly, it looped near a restricted area, not the park boundary, but a Department of Defense zone. There's a fence cutting through part of the forest. No signs mark it from the main roads, but if you follow the back trails long enough, you'll find it. I wasn't trying to do anything illegal. I just enjoy walking the edges of places I'm not supposed to be. It gives me a sense of seeing something most people don't. Around noon, I parked my car off a disused spur road. Old tire tracks were visible, but nothing recent. It felt like no one had been out here in months. A few days later, something strange started happening. Jordan and I had been fishing near Walker Lake, and the weirdness began after we left. In the car, I noticed the dashboard clock showed 12:32 a.m., which seemed right given how long we'd been out. But my watch read 11:07. The second hand was moving, but the time was wrong. I tapped the cheap analog Timex, thinking I might have bumped the dial. Jordan checked his phone. The lock screen showed 11:06 once we were back in town with service. We assumed the phone was slow to update, but something felt off. The next morning, my watch still showed the wrong time, not just a few minutes off, but over an hour. I reset it, and it's kept good time since. 2 days later, Jordan texted me. He'd been sleeping strangely, not having nightmares, but waking up feeling like he hadn't really slept. I'd been experiencing the same thing, but hadn't mentioned it. We didn't go fishing again after that, not for a while anyway, and definitely not near Walker Lake. There's something unsettling about that place, especially at night. The stretch between Hawthorne and Fallon is vast, a long, flat sky with too much empty space. It feels like the kind of place where unexpected things could appear and no one would ever know. I was hiking, equipped with my reliable compass, map, and old Casio digital eyewear. The forest seemed ordinary at first, quiet and still. No wind rustled the branches, no birds chirped, no squirrels scurried. Only the sound of my boots crunching pine needles broke the silence. After about 2 hours of following a dry wash uphill, I came across something unusual. An 8-foot chain-link fence topped with barbed wire stretched endlessly, disappearing into the dense trees. No gates, no markings visible from my side. I took a break near a boulder, hydrated, and checked my compass. Everything seemed normal. The compass pointed northeast, matching my map. I started walking parallel to the fence, keeping about 15 feet away. The terrain grew rockier as I moved. At 4:19 p.m., I planned to continue for another half hour before turning back. Then things got strange. My compass started behaving oddly. At first, I barely noticed, just a feeling of veering off course. When I pulled it out, the needle was spinning slowly, erratically. It would lock momentarily, then start rotating again, seemingly confused. I tried tapping and shaking the compass, thinking maybe I'd crossed a metallic ground vein. Moving uphill didn't help. The needle remained unsettled. That's when I noticed my watch. Still 4:19 p.m. I pressed buttons, but nothing responded. The screen was clear, but time seemed frozen. The silence became overwhelming. No wind, no insects, no wildlife. When I clapped, the echo returned too quickly, as if the space around me was compressed, smaller than it appeared. Something felt fundamentally wrong. I stood motionless, listening. The fence was behind me, untouched, yet I sensed a presence on the other side, not watching, just aware. I was flying from Tonopah to St. George that afternoon in my 1978 Piper Archer. Nothing fancy, just a routine VFR hop I'd made maybe a dozen times before. I knew the route well. Flat desert, sparse traffic, smooth air if the wind's not kicking. Around 3:45 p.m., I took off. Skies were mostly clear, with just a little haze along the horizon. The forecast promised calm conditions all the way across. The first hour of the flight was completely normal. I climbed to 9,500 feet, got settled and leaned the mixture. My usual setup was in place. Autopilot dialed in, ForeFlight on the yoke, engine instruments all checked. Later, something strange happened. I turned around and started heading back the way I'd come. My compass was still spinning, and my watch remained stuck at 4:19. About 5 minutes into the walk back, I passed a dead tree that looked weirdly familiar. Then it hit me. I'd already passed this tree twice before, once going up the hill, once near the fence. The tree's top bent east in an unmistakable way, though I hadn't recognized it at first because of how the bark had peeled back. Something wasn't right. Either I'd walked in a circle or something else had shifted. I checked my map, and my markings no longer lined up. The dry wash I'd been following should have been to my right, downhill, but it was gone, replaced by trees and brush. I kept walking anyway. I didn't care if I had to bushwhack for miles. I just wanted to put distance between me and that fence. After what felt like an hour, I saw my car's hood glinting between the trees. I practically jogged the last stretch. The moment I stepped onto the gravel beside the car, I checked my watch. 4:37 p.m. The seconds were ticking normally now. I pulled out the compass, and the needle pointed due north, steady as ever. I sat in the car for a long time, engine off, windows down, listening. Normal forest sounds returned. Insects, a bird call, the wind picking up. It felt like slipping back into a world I hadn't realized I'd stepped out of. The drive back to the main road took maybe 40 minutes. I didn't stop, not even to check my phone, which suddenly had 3 bars again. That night, I left the watch on my nightstand. The next morning, it was still working. Time was accurate. I tried taking it apart to see if something had glitched or broken, but everything looked normal. No corrosion, no water damage, nothing loose. I haven't worn the watch since, and I haven't gone back to that part of the Kaibab either. I was flying northeast of Rachel, about 35 miles out, when something caught my eye. A strange shimmer hung midair, oval-shaped and long horizontally, right in the center of my windshield. At first, I thought it was a sun reflection, so I shifted to the side. The distortion didn't budge. I keyed the mic calmly. N6845W, observing a visual anomaly. Stand by. My call was matter of fact, not panicked. I just wanted to report what I saw and get a vector around it if needed. Then the shimmer did something odd. It pulsed, not in brightness, but in presence. One moment it was faint, like looking through water. The next, it was nearly invisible. No clouds, no contrails, just empty blue sky and this weird distortion. Suddenly I wasn't flying anymore. When I came to, static crackled in my headset. My hand was still near the push-to-talk button. The panel showed I was level, still at altitude. I glanced at the clock. 4:28 p.m. My last check was at 4:19. I'm not claiming time dramatically jumped, but I had zero memory of those 9 minutes. No course corrections, no turbulence, no radio chatter, nothing, like a skipped film reel. I checked the GPS breadcrumbs. The track looked steady, no zigzags, no altitude changes, just a straight line. But here's the strange part, a 0.3 no-meter gap in the trail. No data for that stretch. It jumped from one point to another as if I'd teleported and I hadn't lost signal. I radioed Salt Lake Center to confirm my earlier transmission. The controller sounded confused. He'd heard part of my call, then silence. He'd tried raising me twice around 4:20 and got nothing. I assured him I was back on course and fine. He didn't press, and neither did I. Landing in St. George around 5:30, I shut down and tied off the aircraft. Pulling out my phone, I prepared to check the voice recordings, memo I sometimes run during flights. Nothing was recorded after the moment I called in the anomaly. It just cut out. Late September near Rachel, Nevada, brought cold nights despite warm days. I was out there with Mason, Jared, and Liz, all of us in our late 20s. Mason's idea was simple: camp near the Area 51 border, not to trespass, but just to watch the sky and maybe catch something unusual. We parked my Tacoma behind a low ridge to block wind, set up 2 tents about half a mile from the no trespassing signs, still on public land. Weeks later, while reviewing my GoPro footage from a flight, something strange caught my attention. The camera was mounted over my shoulder, angled at the panel and windscreen, recording in 1-hour loops. Everything looked normal until just before I saw the shimmer. The video glitched. One frame showed a clear sky, the next a faint, arched blur across the horizon. Then the video jumped, and the clock skipped 9 minutes without explanation. No buffer full, no card error, just gone. The rest of the flight looked fine. After landing, I walked across the ramp and sat at a concrete picnic table near the hangars. For about 20 minutes, I tried to make sense of what happened. I wasn't hurt, didn't hurt to feel dizzy or sick. But my left wrist, the skin under my watch, had a peculiar red outline like a sunburn, just that one patch, nowhere else. I hadn't removed my watch during the entire flight. That night, I called a friend in charter ops at Kingman, sharing part of the story while omitting the stranger details. He asked if I'd been flying near any restricted zones. I double-checked the map. I was clear. The closest edge of the R4808 complex was still 20 miles south. I didn't file a report or contact the FAA. What would I even say? I still fly that route occasionally, now staying further north and adding a few extra minutes for peace of mind. Nothing else has happened since. But I can't explain those 9 missing minutes or why I used the phrase visual anomaly into the mic. I don't remember choosing those words and have never used that term before. As the sun set, we had a small fire ring going, and everyone was in good spirits. Liz pulled out some cheap night vision binoculars, and we took turns passing them around, identifying aircraft. The differences were clear. Commercial planes moved differently from military ones, their speed and altitude distinct. Around 10 p.m., something caught our eye, an aircraft banking impossibly hard and fast. Too far to make out details, but definitely unusual. By midnight, the wind picked up, and the group decided to sleep. I remained, settling into a collapsible camp chair near the dying fire. I've never been great at sleeping on the ground, so I preferred being the last one awake. Silence enveloped the campsite. The fire had dwindled to embers, with only the wind's soft whisper against rocks and tent walls breaking the quiet. That's when the red light appeared. It wasn't from above like a helicopter. No engine sounds, no vehicle, no flashlight. Just a perfectly even, wide beam sliding across the ground about 20 feet from me. 4 feet wide, maybe 10 feet long. A rectangular shape gliding sideways. Initially, I thought someone might be flying a drone, but we were miles from any other campers. Slowly standing, I watched the beam move into the brush. No sound. No visible source. I scanned the sky, checked the hills, turned completely around. Nothing explained its origin. Suddenly it stopped. Not a fade out, but a complete freeze for 2 seconds before vanishing. Not switching off, but simply disappearing. My breath caught. The darkness seemed deeper now. The fire was almost out, and moonlight had slipped behind the ridge. My flashlight revealed nothing unusual, just sagebrush, dirt, and some earlier tire tracks. I sat back down, keeping the flashlight on my lap, reluctant to wake the others. I tried rationalizing what I'd seen. A plane reflection, maybe? But the angle was wrong, and the absolute silence contradicted that theory. Fully alert, I waited, watching and wondering. The morning started like any other drone shoot near Calhoun, Colorado. Open plains, farmland, and a clear sky stretched out before me. I'd driven from Colorado Springs with my Mavic Pro, planning to capture some low-altitude shots of an abandoned grain silo I'd found on Google Earth. This was standard work for me. 4 years of freelance drone photography, mostly real estate and construction surveys. I always checked airspace maps and was meticulous about battery levels. No crashes, no lost signals. Later that night, a strange series of events unfolded at our campsite. Around 20 feet northwest of our tents, I heard an unusual sound. 4 distinct clicks, rhythmic and fast, not mechanical, not metal, more like tongue clicks. Evenly spaced, then silence. I stood up, flashlight off, and listened. Another set of clicks followed, identical to the first. Almost involuntarily I said hello. Nothing responded. The silence was complete. No wind, no animals, no footsteps. Something felt wrong. I took a few PS toward the sound, then stopped. It felt like a trap. Slowly, I retreated to the truck and locked the doors. I waited, listening intently for an hour. No more clicks, no more strange lights. Morning came around 7 a.m. Mason was boiling water, and Jared and Liz seemed unaware of anything unusual. I asked if anyone had been awake during the night. Everyone said no. When we packed up, I stopped the truck near where I'd seen a red beam sweep across the ground earlier. Walking out, I discovered a faint rectangular impression in the dust. Not burned or wet, just slightly compressed, as if something had been pressed into the ground and then removed. We drove out quietly. Passing the no drones sign near the cattle grid, Mason joked about the risks of flying in this area. But my mind was elsewhere, fixated on that beam. It hadn't moved like normal light. Something was different, something unexplained. The day started like any other drone mission. I was out early, around 8 a.m., parked near some half-dead cottonwoods on a dirt road. The landscape stretched out flat and wide, with wildfire smoke hazily drifting across the low 70s sky. From this vantage point, you could spot a pickup's dust cloud miles away. At 8:15, I launched the drone, sending it up to about 120 feet over the wheat stubble toward the silo. Everything looked perfect. Clean video feed, strong GPS, no birds or signal interference. I ran a few wide orbits around the structure, then dropped down to about 30 feet for some close tracking shots along the dirt road. That's when things got weird. The drone just stopped. Not a crash, but a complete mid-air halt, like something had grabbed it out of nowhere. My telemetry still showed full signal bars, battery at 63%, no wind warnings, no obstacle alerts. But the drone wasn't responding to any controls. I tried everything. Turning, adjusting pitch, hitting return to home, nothing worked. It just hovered. Then suddenly, the altitude dropped from 33 feet to 0 in a single second. Strangely, I never saw it fall, and the video feed remained uninterrupted. The feed froze on a final frame, then went black, as if someone had covered the lens. The app still thought the drone was connected, but wouldn't respond to any commands. A tight feeling gripped my chest. I shut down the controller and started searching. The dry, flat field should have made finding the drone easy, but after pacing a 10-yard grid for nearly half an hour, I found nothing. I checked around the silo's perimeter, hoping it might have clipped something during descent. Just as I was about to give up, something caught my eye about 50 yards north, half hidden under a rusted cattle trough. The drone was there, completely intact. No scratches, no bent props, no gimbal lock. But it was totally dead, despite having over 60% battery just moments before. I went back to the same spot the next weekend, mostly to see if it was some localized signal issue. Same drone, new battery, but I didn't even get the propeller spinning. Before launching, I noticed this weird shimmer on the horizon. At first I thought it was heat haze, a wavering spot about 200 feet above ground, like the air was bending. When I stepped forward to get a better look, it just blinked out like a mirage vanishing. About a minute later, the drone app started flashing a no-fly zone warning. This wasn't a typical TFR or advisory, but a hard block like you'd see near an airport, except there was nothing restricted in that exact spot. I checked FAA maps, before you fly resources, and even pulled up sectional charts. No restricted airspace showed up for 5 miles in any direction. I waited 20 minutes, but the block remained. I tried a different drone, smaller and less sensitive, but it wouldn't even arm the motors. Since then, I haven't flown out there again. Occasionally, I'll pull up the old GPS, coordinates where I found the drone, 38.8872, NES 104.2957, just to see if anything appears on satellite view. But there's nothing, just an old trough. Same cracked dirt, same weeds, no towers, no gear, no signs. I kept the drone. It still won't power on. It all started when the drone wouldn't launch. The battery light wouldn't flash, wouldn't charge, wouldn't register in the charger back home. The backup battery was the same, fine when I left, totally drained when I found it. That day, I didn't touch anything else, just packed up and drove home. That night, I connected the drone to my laptop to retrieve whatever was left on the SD card. The files stopped exactly at 8:31 a.m. The telemetry showed a drop at the same second. No footage of the fall existed. The last video was a smooth, clear shot of the silo's southern wall, then black. I checked the flight logs. They indicated a normal landing, not a crash, not forced down. But I never initiated landing, and the drone wasn't near its last GPS point. Curious, I sent the log to DJI support. They said the file showed no errors, no signal loss, and looked like a safe manual landing, which made no sense. I tried every control, and it didn't respond. I was out checking the south pasture around 2 a.m. early November, and that's when everything strange began. The ranch stretches about 12 miles east of Tunipa, mostly open range and sagebrush with a few old juniper clusters near the hills. My closest neighbor is 5 miles south. I've got motion lights along the back half of the property and a trail cam by the water trough, mainly to watch for mountain lions. It's quiet country, flat for miles, with ridges to the north. I'd heard the cattle stirring from the house, and when you've lived out here long enough, you get a sense of what's normal. This wasn't coyotes. The movement felt different, heavier, more spread out. So I took the quad out, same one I've had since 2008, with my spotlight, thermos, and 30-30. Not because I expected trouble, just habit. It was cold but clear. No wind, no moon, stars sharp as glass. Around 2:20, I reached the south line and parked next to the cattle gate. Engine off, I listened. First, nothing. Just the cooling engine's clicks and occasional cow movements far to the east. I swept the spotlight across the area. Everything looked fine. Just as I was about to get back on the quad, movement caught my eye. 400 yards out, beyond the fence where the land drops toward the dry creek bed. At first I thought it was a stray cow, but something was off. The shape was wrong. Too narrow, too tall, and it wasn't walking, it was gliding. That's what stuck with me. No bouncing or swaying like an animal crossing uneven ground, just moving in a perfectly straight line, maybe 4 or 5 feet above the desert floor. No wings, no legs, just a dark shape against the brush, about 7 feet tall, longer than wide. I considered a tarp caught in the wind, but there was no wind. Its movement was too deliberate. I stood behind the fence, watching. Didn't reach for the rifle. Didn't call out. Can't explain why. Then the spotlight died. Not flickered. Just snapped off. Fresh batteries and nothing worked. So I used the rifle's scope for a better look. The shape continued. Same height, same speed. Heading west, parallel to the fence line. Not coming toward me, not avoiding me. Just steady. I was out on my quad near the creek bed around midnight, late October. I'd been driving the fence line, routine patrol, nothing out of the ordinary. Then something happened that I still can't explain. The quad just stopped, completely. Mid-air, like it had hit an invisible barrier. I lowered the rifle and blinked, thinking maybe I was seeing things. But no, it was still there, perfectly suspended above the brush. The atmosphere changed instantly. Air grew heavy. My ears popped, like I'd shot up in an elevator. The hairs on my arms stood up, even under my jacket. It felt exactly like the moment before a massive thunderclap, except the sky was completely silent. I scanned upward, checking for anything blocking the stars. Nothing, just an oppressive silence and pressure. Suddenly, the instrument panel went haywire. Lights started blinking. The fuel gauge spun a full circle. The odometer reset itself. The radio crackled with static for half a second, then cut out. Even stranger, the starter clicked once, and my keys were in my coat pocket. The object in the field remained motionless. I backed away slowly, maybe 10 steps, not wanting to turn my back on it. About a minute later, it started moving again. Same direction, same height, same speed, as if nothing had interrupted its path. The moment it resumed motion, the air snapped back to normal. My ears popped again, this time in reverse. I could hear cattle shuffling in the darkness. I watched until it disappeared behind a small rise near the creek bed. Never saw it again. I waited another 10 minutes before getting back on the quad. Everything seemed normal, except the spotlight still wouldn't turn on. Back at the house, I checked the trail cam footage. From frames 217 to 228, nothing but a static image of an empty water trough. Time kept moving, but the picture remained frozen. The next morning, I returned with my dogs. No tracks, no marks in the dust. The fence was untouched. I kept this to myself for a while. Eventually, I mentioned it to my neighbor Kyle over some beers. He just nodded, said he'd seen something similar near the same creek bed about 6 years back. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press him. These days, I still walk the fences at night, still ride the same quad, but I avoid that particular stretch. I just keep going. I'd done the Area 51 tourist route countless times before, always stopping for the obligatory photo by the warning sign. But this night was different. My plan was simple: park, sit, and watch the sky. I'd come prepared. A folding chair, some snacks, a cheap monocular from a pawn shop, and a warm blanket were my companions. Knowing there'd be no cell signal, I downloaded star maps and switched my phone to airplane mode. The night air was colder than expected, probably in the low 40s, but the sky was a pristine canvas of stars. No clouds, no moon, just an endless expanse of celestial light. My car sat about 200 yards off the main dirt road on a flat pullout. Miles from any artificial light, I killed the engine and left the keys in the cup holder. The surrounding mountains looked surreal, like cardboard cutouts propped against the starry backdrop. One range to the north, the Papoose Range, always seemed deceptively close. Peering through my monocular near the Cassiopeia constellation, a subtle flash caught my attention, not from the sky, but from the ground. It wasn't bright, more like a momentary, almost imperceptible flicker. No sound accompanied it. The light was a dull orange, reminiscent of a sodium lamp, definitely not from any natural source or vehicle. When I lowered the monocular, something extraordinary happened. The mountain ridge seemed to flicker like an old film reel, shifting impossibly. Behind or within the terrain, I glimpsed a massive shape, angular, smooth, about the size of a small stadium. An arch or dome that stood out starkly against the surrounding landscape. As quickly as it appeared, the light vanished. The mountains returned to their normal state. I stood frozen, trying to comprehend what I'd just witnessed. Was it fatigue? A trick of vision? I wrapped myself in the blanket and continued watching, my mind racing. 10 minutes passed in complete silence. Just as I started to relax, my car's dome light suddenly flickered on, with the driver's side door still firmly shut. We were hiking near Queen City Summit, right at the edge of the Nevada Test and Training Range. Those yellow metal signs with their stark warnings about deadly force and hidden sensors made it clear we weren't stepping onto the base itself, just close enough to feel the tension. Me, my cousin Tyler, and his friend Marco weren't looking to cause trouble. Tyler works as a machinist in Sacramento and loves aerospace, while Marco's the conspiracy type, complete with a flat brim hat and infrared scope. I'm not really into that scene, but I enjoy hiking and had a free weekend, so I tagged along. We parked off a dirt road east of Rachel and settled in. Later, I found myself sitting 10 feet away from the car, noticing something odd. No animals around, no wind, but the interior light was glowing faintly through the windows, as if someone had cracked the door, except it was still completely sealed. I walked over, opened the door fully, and looked inside. Everything was untouched. Keys remained in the cup holder, windows rolled up. When I closed the door, the light switched off. Sitting behind the wheel with the engine off, I stared at the mountains through the windshield. Tiny flickers caught my eye every few minutes, faint pulses like heat lightning without clouds. I turned on the radio, hoping for some sound. Static. Every single station, AM and FM, was just dead air. No background fuzz, nothing. That made me uneasy. I switched the radio off and cracked the window an inch. Then I realized the absolute silence surrounding me. No insects, no wind, just a dead, airless quiet. I sat there for another 30 minutes, watching the mountains, half expecting them to stutter again. They never did. But the silence persisted, and an unsettling feeling grew that something lurked behind the ridgeline, something not part of this desert. Eventually, I started the car. Everything came on normally. No dashboard lights, no system errors. I drove back down Groom Lake Road slowly, checking the rearview mirror frequently. Once I hit the highway, radio stations returned one by one. Static faded, music played, talk shows emerged. The desert behind me looked unchanged, vast and empty. I've been out there a few times since. Never saw that flicker again, but I don't park near that stretch of mountains anymore. We were camping in the desert, about 6 miles in along a dry wash. The night was early March, chilly but not freezing. No clouds, no moon, just a thick canopy of stars overhead. We'd set up camp behind a rock formation that blocked the wind, built a small fire, and cooked some sausages and canned beans. Tyler was tinkering with a homemade antenna designed to pick up air traffic control signals. Marco was scanning the sky with his monocular. I was relaxing on my pad, gazing up at Orion. Everything seemed normal. Then we heard it. A soft, high-pitched buzzing that felt mechanical, suspended in the air around us. Not loud, but steady. Tyler sat up. "You hear that?" Marco nodded silently, already pointing his monocular toward the ridge behind us. I stood and looked. At first, just stars. Then 3 of them moved. They formed a perfect triangle, equally spaced, hovering low in the sky. The lights were white but dim, less bright than aircraft strobes, completely motionless. The buzzing increased slightly, like an old fluorescent light turning on. I tried to use my phone camera, but it froze. The screen stayed lit, but no apps would work. Tyler's phone was completely dead. Marco's hand-cranked flashlight was our only working device. When Marco turned on the flashlight and pointed it upward, something strange happened. The buzzing instantly stopped. The triangle of lights began drifting sideways, slow and deliberate, as if moving along an invisible track. No tilting, no wobbling, no trailing behind. We watched for maybe 20 seconds, then it vanished. Not by zooming away or fading out, it simply blinked off, gone. The buzzing didn't return. The stars looked completely normal again. We stood in stunned silence for a long time. Nobody touched their phones. Eventually, we sat by the fire. Marco went to his tent early. Tyler just poked at the coals, continuously glancing up, processing what we just witnessed. I was 29 back in 2009, working as an air traffic controller at a small FAA center near Newport on the Oregon coast. After 4 years on the job, I'd settled into the night shift routine. Those shifts were quiet, mostly cargo flights and occasional medevacs heading to Portland. The center was basic: one main radar display room, a communications console, and a few workstations. That night, just past 2 a.m., only Dan Holloway and I were on duty. Dan was a 20-year veteran who rarely spoke unless something needed attention. We weren't close, but I trusted him. The night was clear and calm, with just a UPS flight moving south along the coast and a corporate jet near Boise. I was sipping gas station coffee and working on a crossword when something caught my eye. A blip appeared in the top right corner of the radar, over open water. The return was tagged at 80,000 feet with no transponder. While not entirely unusual, military sometimes runs dark operations. This wasn't in any scheduled military corridors. Dan had noticed it too. He just raised his eyebrows, saying nothing. Following standard procedure, I tried hailing it on the guard frequency. No response. I zoomed in and flagged it for observation. The radar showed it holding steady for about 10 seconds before dropping, not gradually, but from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. I stared, waiting for some correction. Ghost returns happen, but this was different. Years later, during a camping trip with Marco, I'd have a similar experience. We were out in the wilderness when something strange occurred. My phone initially seemed fine, 82% battery, apps working, photos and flashlight operational. Marco claimed his screen went green with a clicking noise before shutting down. His phone wouldn't boot until we were halfway back to the car. We didn't report anything. Who would we even tell? All I know is we saw something, and for some reason, our gear stopped working during the incident. The memory of that night at the radar station and this camping trip still lingers, unexplained and unsettling. I was camped out on Bureau of Land Management territory near Factory, Utah, far from any dirt road. The night was calm, the radar screen flickering with routine signals. Something caught our attention, a return that was different, not like the usual weather blips or interference. Dan leaned over, his voice low. Real quiet. "You seeing that?" I nodded, watching the strange signal. Then, just like that, it vanished, not gradually fading or drifting off the radar's edge, but blinking out mid-grid, as if someone had flipped a switch. No trail, no climb, nothing. We sat in silence, and I pulled up the raw radar playback, hoping for a rational explanation. But the data confirmed what we'd seen. A signal appearing at 80,000 feet, holding steady for a few sweeps, then dropping straight to sea level in less than a second before disappearing completely. I ran a system diagnostic. Everything checked out. No errors, no drop pings. Against protocol, I printed a hard copy of the return logs. Something told me I might want proof later. Dan remained silent, returning to his screen. Around 2 a.m., 2 men arrived. They weren't in uniform and drove no recognizable vehicle. Using badge access, they entered through the side entrance. They didn't introduce themselves, just claimed to be contract IT support from Seattle. One went directly to the radar terminal, while the other requested system logs from Dan. When I asked who called them, Dan's only response was, "Not us." They remained until just after 5 a.m. By the time they left, the system had been rebooted. Hard drives were purged, and every radar sweep from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. had been overwritten. The logs I'd printed vanished. Dan and I exchanged a look. Before I could speak, he cut me off. "Don't." We completed our shift as if nothing happened, logging a quiet night with no incidents. A week later, I was called into the manager's office for what they claimed was a standard radar proficiency review. They asked if I remembered anything unusual. I replied, "No, just a quiet night." They smiled. "Thought so." Dan transferred to Phoenix months later. I left the FAA the following year. I've never encountered anything similar since. Nothing even close. But I think about that night more often than I probably should. I hiked out to my usual camping spot, a quarter-mile from the trailhead. The landscape was otherworldly, mostly flat with strange hills and rock formations that made you feel like you were on the moon. Early October brought a clear, cool night with no wind. Around 6:30, I set up my small one-man tent in a basic rock fire pit. After making a dehydrated meal, I watched the sky transform from orange to purple, then deep black. The stars emerged with an intensity I hadn't seen all year, bright and sharp, with no moon to dim their brilliance. I settled into my camp chair, sipping whiskey from a metal flask and scanning the sky for shooting stars. My phone was off, with no service anyway. The silence was profound, almost alive. It seemed to create its own sounds, phantom footsteps that were really just wind or the rhythm of my own blood. Well, after 11, I crawled into my tent. Sleep didn't come immediately. A strange buzzing sensation filled my head, like the pressure you feel during an airplane's ascent. I chalked it up to exhaustion or dehydration and tried to relax. Then I heard it, a deep, low rumble. At first I thought it was a military jet, common in this desert landscape. But something was different. The sound wasn't moving across the sky. It was hovering directly overhead. My tent began to vibrate gently, the poles flexing slightly. Curious, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Instantly, something felt wrong. Complete silence replaced the rumbling. When I looked up, a perfect circular section of sky had vanished. Not clouded over, not darkened, simply gone. A precise hole, as if cut by a cookie cutter, absorbed all light. The surrounding stars seemed to glow more intensely at the edges of this bizarre void. I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Time seemed to suspend. Was I watching for seconds or minutes? The blackness hung there, utterly motionless, defying everything I understood about the night sky. I was working out of a temporary botany field lab in central Utah. Just me and a generator about 100 miles from the nearest town. Nothing but sandstone and sagebrush for miles. The station sat in a narrow gulch just south of the San Rafael swell backed up against a small bluff. That night, something strange happened. At the edges of a black circle in the sky, I noticed rippling, not like lights, but more like heat waves. A faint hum started inside my chest, creating a pressure that made my skin feel tight. I felt completely exposed, as if under intense scrutiny. Slowly, I stepped back toward my tent, eyes locked on the phenomenon. Without realizing, I was holding my breath. Then, silently, the black circle began to fade. The stars gradually bled back into the sky, one by one, until everything looked normal again. The moment it disappeared, the breeze returned. I could hear my own breathing. Instead of going back to the tent, I sat by the fire pit and watched the sky. Nothing happened. No jets, no lights, no sounds. Around 2 a.m., I crawled inside, zipped up the tent. Sleep never came. At first light, I broke camp quickly. No breakfast, no coffee. I packed everything in just 15 minutes and hiked back to the truck. Something felt wrong immediately. The driver's side door was unlocked, something I never do. Always lock it, especially when leaving the vehicle overnight in such a remote location. It's pure muscle memory for me. Nothing seemed disturbed. The glove box was closed, and the cooler in the truck bed remained untouched. But the cab had a strange smell, like static, similar to overheating electronics. I drove out fast, bouncing over the rough terrain, constantly checking the rearview mirror as if expecting someone to follow. The landscape behind me remained empty. I didn't stop until reaching Hanksville. At the gas station, I filled up, used the bathroom, and sat in the truck with the AC running. Checking my phone revealed no texts or missed calls, just a brief SIM error notification that quickly resolved itself. During the drive home, I kept thinking about that black circle, perfectly round, with razor-sharp edges like a geometric hole in the sky. One thing was certain, I haven't camped alone since. My living quarters were compact, designed for solo occupancy. A small attached greenhouse held my workspace. I was deep into cataloging genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. Quiet, solitary work. That week, the weather hung motionless. No breeze, no clouds. The landscape seemed suspended, holding its breath. My greenhouse windows stayed wide open, but the air remained utterly still. Insects were scarce, and the heat felt different, heavy even after sunset. The first sign was the soil sensors. 6 custom-rigged Arduino units I'd assembled myself, tracking temperature, moisture, and pH. They normally transmitted data to my laptop every 10 minutes. Tuesday morning revealed something strange, a 5-hour data gap from midnight to just before 5 a.m. The system had completely flatlined, then resumed as if nothing happened. I ruled out power issues, the generator ran continuously, and my laptop stayed online. That afternoon, I discovered an anomaly in the greenhouse. One hanging LED grow light had shorted dramatically. Its plastic casing looked half melted, as if someone had applied a blowtorch to its edge. It wasn't near any heat source that could explain such damage. The wiring had pulled loose on one side. I replaced it, attributing the issue to potential faulty wiring. Around 2 a.m. the next night, the sensor alarm jolted me awake. 3 sharp beeps signaled a critical pH drop below 4.0, an unprecedented acid spike in the soil. Pulling on my boots and grabbing a flashlight, I headed out. The air carried an odd scent, burned dust like minerals scorched by a lightning strike. Opening the greenhouse door, a wave of unexpected humidity hit me. I hadn't watered anything, and it hadn't rained in days. Yet the glass was completely fogged. Stepping inside, I froze. Every single plant had transformed. They were nothing like the carefully tended specimens I'd checked just hours before. The greenhouse was unsettling. Every potted plant had rotated precisely, not knocked over or dragged, but gently swiveled to face inward. At the center, a bare meter-wide patch of soil sat untouched. I'd left this space open for new specimens. Something had clearly been there. The soil was smoothly pressed down, creating a shallow depression without any prints or marks. Above this spot, the glass ceiling bore strange evidence. A faint black scorch mark spread in a ring about a foot wide. The glass wasn't broken, but it had faintly spiderwebbed at the mark's center. The metal framing around it looked subtly warped, with a strange heat distortion. I backed out and locked the door. The next morning, I checked the security camera. My time-lapse setup normally captured a still every half minute. When I opened the previous night's folder, something was wrong. The plants looked normal until 12:47 a.m. Then the footage went haywire. Static flickered. Frames turned black or white. The timestamp suddenly jumped 4 hours ahead. I ran a recovery program on the memory card. It found 437 partial or missing images. Clicking through thumbnails revealed mostly garbage data. A few showed fleeting bursts of violet and pale green light. One blurry image caught what might have been a smooth, metallic curve in the corner. I deleted the corrupted files. That day, the plants behaved oddly. Gallium leaves curled inward as if enclosing something. 2 wild barley pots bent their stems at sharp 90-degree angles toward the central spot, maintaining that position even after I rotated them. I was out in the greenhouse, sitting in a chair with a flashlight in my lap. It was Thursday night, and I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Around 1:30 in the morning, something strange happened. The temperature plummeted rapidly, dropping from 77 degrees to 61 degrees in less than 5 minutes. The air felt electric. My arm hair stood on end. LED lights flickered and then went dark. An eerie silence descended. I couldn't tell if it lasted 2 minutes or 10. No sounds broke through. No generator, no wind, not even the distant hum of insects. Just complete stillness. When I finally switched on my flashlight, I noticed the center spot looked darker, as if wet, though no rain had fallen. The plants were slightly tilted again. The next morning, all 6 soil sensors were destroyed. Their plastic casings were bubbled, wires melted into the dirt. Strangely, my laptop remained untouched, and nothing else in the greenhouse showed any damage. I decided then to end my trip, radioing in about a hardware malfunction. No questions were asked. Before leaving, I collected a small soil sample in a sealed jar, which now sits on a shelf in my apartment. Over the following days, it dried out and changed color, from dark red to gray. A faint ring formed inside the glass where the soil didn't stick, almost like something had pushed outward from the center. Occasionally, I catch a fleeting whiff of burned dust when passing by. This happened last September at our little cabin in northern Minnesota. It's a weekend retreat tucked away in the woods, off a dirt road barely visible on GPS. My dad and I built it years ago, starting as a hunting shack and gradually improving it. We added insulation, solar power, and a well pump. No cell service out there. That's part of its charm. It was one of the last weekends before the weather turned. The leaves were changing, with cold nights but warm days. We drove up Friday after work, ready for a quiet weekend away. We arrived at the cabin a little after dark. While I got the fire going, Becca unpacked groceries, following our usual routine. Later that night, we sat on the porch, listening to the woods. Up here, the silence is different from near town. No traffic, no barking dogs, just wind rustling through trees and an occasional owl. Around 11, something changed. The sounds weren't animal-like anymore. Instead, we heard distinct snapping noises, like someone stepping on sticks, pausing, then stepping again, about 50 feet away. I stood up and swept the flashlight around, but saw nothing. Probably a deer or porcupine, I thought. But Becca grew uneasy. She hates not knowing what might be lurking. I walked the tree line with the light, finding nothing. Yet the feeling lingered. Something was watching us. The next morning, we discovered our trail cam lying in the dirt. We'd mounted it on a birch about 15 feet from the cabin a few weeks earlier to track wildlife. Strangely, it hadn't fallen. The strap was unbuckled, as if deliberately removed and dropped. Initially, I suspected a bear's curiosity, but there were no scratches, no mud, no teeth marks. The camera wasn't even dirty. We brought it inside and powered it up. The battery was fine, and the storage card was full. Plugging it into my laptop revealed 86 clips from that night. The first few were typical. Trees moving, a rabbit hopping by, nothing unusual. Then at 11:13 p.m., everything changed. The screen went black, but not like natural darkness. It was corrupted video, static bars, and weird pixelation that made no sense. This continued through clip after clip for nearly 2 hours. Except for one clip. 30 seconds long, timestamped 12:42 a.m., it appeared to be filmed inside our cabin. Our bed was visible, with the familiar flannel sheets and old headboard. Becca and I were asleep, breathing slowly. The camera was positioned low, at floor level. And then, barely visible at the top edge of the frame, something was standing, just a sliver of it. Long, pale ears curled around the camera's edge. These weren't human ears. The joints bent unnaturally, and there were too many of them. I scrubbed the timeline back and forth, but there was no sound, no movement, just that single, unsettling glimpse. The first sign something was wrong came after the video file ended, freezing like a still frame. I didn't show Becca right away. Instead, I closed the laptop and made up an excuse about corrupted footage. But she could tell something was off. That afternoon, she found and watched the file herself. When I heard her in the bedroom, her silence was more unsettling than any scream. She was already packing when I entered the room. Within an hour, we had left, not even bothering to lock up. We drove back to Duth and stayed at her sister's place. For days, we avoided discussing what happened. But then the dreams started. I'd wake up with a low, static-like buzzing in my head, unable to remember the dream. I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Once I found myself standing in the hallway, pillow in hand. Another time, inexplicable mud covered my feet. Becca's experience was worse. Between 2 and 3 a.m., she'd get nosebleeds. She'd wake up dizzy, her arms numb. One night, she swore she saw a bluish, silent light seeping through the ceiling like a flashlight. When I suggested seeing a doctor, she refused, certain it wouldn't help. 2 weeks later, I returned to the cabin alone, telling myself I needed to check for a break-in or prank. The front door was locked, nothing seemed disturbed, no broken windows, no animal signs, but the trail cam was back on the tree, reattached as if it had never been moved. The SD card was gone. I searched everywhere, digging through grass, checking the cabin, even dismantling the firewood stack. Nothing. Leaving, a tight pressure built behind my eyes, worse than a sinus headache. It persisted until I crossed back onto the highway. We haven't returned since. The cabin remains, its power still running on solar. We don't discuss it anymore. Months later, the laptop with the video file stopped booting. The repair shop said the hard drive was wiped with no explanation. We still don't know what was in that video, what was in our room, or how the camera got there. The mystery remains unsolved. I used to hike at night a lot, especially in the fall. The trails were quieter, the air cooler, and the bugs were nowhere to be found. My favorite route was a loop trail in the Ada Mountains, not far from Talamana Scenic Drive in southeast Oklahoma. Nothing too challenging, just peaceful ridgelines cutting through dense pine forest. My typical routine was starting around 8 or 9 p.m. and finishing between 1 and 2 in the morning, depending on my pace. This particular night in late October was cold but clear. The leaves crunched underfoot, and a half-full moon cast soft shadows across the landscape. Just enough light to hint at the surroundings, but not enough to hike without a headlamp. I parked at a small turnout near the trailhead around 8:40 p.m., checked my gear, and set off. At first, everything was typical. Wind rustling through trees, distant owl calls breaking the silence. About halfway through the loop, around 11:15, I stopped at an overlook with a view down into the valley. I sat on a flat rock, ate a protein bar, and switched off my light to soak in the quiet. That's when things got strange. 3 faint bluish-white lights appeared through the treetops across the valley. They were barely visible, moving slowly and holding a perfect triangular formation. Unlike airplane lights, these didn't blink. They glided just above the treetops, completely silent and unnaturally smooth, as if moving on invisible tracks. No engine noise, no contrails, no tilting or banking. The way it moved was fundamentally wrong. Something about its motion felt alien, mechanical. I turned my headlamp back on, suddenly feeling exposed. The sensation of being watched crept over me, that tight, inexplicable feeling in the pit of your stomach. I hiked faster after that, occasionally catching myself turning off the light and listening. The forest seemed different now, charged with an unsettling energy. And whatever those fingers were that I glimpsed, they weren't human. They were something else entirely. The ridge was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No wind, no insects, no rustling, just heavy stillness. I was about 20 minutes from the trail's highest point, a flat area with younger pines and open sky, when a strange smell caught my attention. It wasn't sulfur or rotting meat, but more like scorched plastic or a hot circuit board. The scent wasn't strong, yet it felt distinctly out of place. Unlike typical woodland odors that drift and fade, this remained steady. I swept my light across the trees, finding nothing. No smoke, no fire, just that sharp artificial smell hanging in the air. My pace slowed, and I moved carefully. Silence surrounded me until a subtle sound broke through, branches shifting to my left. Not breaking, but moving as if something large was gliding smoothly through the trees, matching my rhythm. When I stopped, the movement stopped. When I resumed walking, it started again. I didn't want to run or make noise, so I gradually increased my speed. Surprisingly, the sound didn't follow. As I reached the ridge, both the mysterious smell and movement vanished. Near a clearing where the trail runs along the hillside, with moonlight casting its glow, I saw it. A triangle suspended directly above the trees, about 100 yards out. Faint lights marked each corner. No movement, no sound, no wind, just absolute stillness. I switched off my headlamp and crouched in the brush, watching. This wasn't like a drone. No wobbling, no flickering, just perfect, unnatural stillness. After half a minute, it began moving, not toward or away from me, but sliding sideways, flat and level, as if part of the sky itself. Then I noticed something truly bizarre. Inside the triangle, the sky was completely black. Not just dark, but empty. A void that completely blocked out even the faintest stars. It was like looking at a hole punched through the night. I remained crouched until the shape passed behind some trees and disappeared from view. I never saw it again. I was up early that morning preparing a weather balloon launch on the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas. Late April, just before dawn, the air held a cool crispness with hints of the day's coming heat. My job as a meteorologist for a small private research outfit mostly involved routine work, sending balloons up to gather upper atmosphere data for storm forecasting. Nothing glamorous, just charts and numbers, but I enjoyed being out where the sky stretched wide and empty. That day's launch proceeded like countless others before. We set up the ball, UN and payload, attaching sensors, radios, and a tiny downward-facing camera. The process was almost entirely automated. with only the launch and tracking requiring human oversight. I stood beside the basket, watching the balloon rise and gradually shrink, drifting eastward with the morning wind. My radio scanner picked up ambient air traffic sounds. Months later, during a night hike that would change everything, I encountered something inexplicable. After finishing my loop, I returned to my car and sat for a moment, trying to calm down. Something felt off. My phone showed 2:47 a.m., which made no sense. The loop typically took 4 to 5 hours with breaks, and even with extra caution, I should have been back by 1:30 at the latest. I hadn't stopped long enough to lose that much time. Checking my tracking app revealed something strange. A large data gap between two GPS points. The app showed a straight line across a section of trail that should have had several curves. This gap matched the missing time precisely. I drove home in complete silence, gripping the steering wheel and watching the roadside trees, alert for any unexpected movement. From that point on, night hikes were off limits. I continued hiking during daylight, sticking to open trails with cell signal and nearby people. I never encountered that burning plastic smell or those strange lights again. Yet sometimes, lying in bed, I'd recall how quietly it moved, how close it was, like it didn't care whether I saw it. Or maybe it did. The weather balloon was rising steadily into the morning sky, its soft chatter blending with distant commercial flights. Sunrise was spreading a pale gold across the horizon, and I pulled out my binoculars to watch. A tiny bright dot caught my attention, hanging motionless high above, not like a plane or bird, but something different. At first I thought it might be a weather satellite or research drone, but something felt unusual. The object was a sharp silver, completely still, with no navigation lights or blinking, just a smooth, constant shine reflecting sunlight. I adjusted my binoculars for a closer look. It appeared small, maybe a few feet wide, hovering almost perfectly stationary against the pale blue backdrop. No sound, no contrails, no visible wings or rotors, just this metallic glint suspended in space. I tapped the radio and contacted the air traffic controller. Amarillo weather balloon launch here. We're seeing a small object about 20,000 feet up slightly north of our location. Static crackled, then a calm male voice responded. No known traffic in your area at that altitude. Nothing on radar matching your description. I repeated my observation, providing coordinates, but received the same response. Nothing detected. The balloon continued climbing, now approaching 23,000 feet and entering commercial airspace. The mysterious object remained, hovering about 5,000 feet higher. Monitoring the balloon's telemetry on my laptop, I noticed something odd. The GPS altitude was fluctuating more than usual, with slight unexpected dips and rises. Checking the balloon's downward-facing camera feed, I caught a small slice of sky above the horizon. Initially, the metallic object was barely visible, but as the balloon drifted, it slowly edged into frame, faint but unmistakable, a perfectly round, smooth, and gleaming shape. The morning started calm, but things quickly changed. A steady breeze picked up as the sun rose, and I pulled my jacket tighter. The balloon's data revealed an unexpected pattern. Its ascent rate dropped sharply and then leveled off. Outside, the object remained motionless in the sky, suspended like a silent watcher. For 20 minutes I monitored the screen and scanned the horizon with binoculars. The balloon began its anticipated descent, and the object's metallic surface gleamed, almost liquid-like in the sunlight. A small commercial jet crossed the horizon heading west, well below the unidentified object. On the radio frequency I was monitoring, the pilot reported nothing unusual. As the balloon dropped below 15,000 feet, something extraordinary happened. The object vanished instantaneously. No flash, no sound, no trail, just gone. I searched the sky for 5 minutes but found nothing. The balloon's parachute deployed as planned, drifting gently to the ground about 50 meters east of Amarillo. Later that afternoon, I retrieved the balloon and returned to the office to review the flight data. The altitude fluctuations during ascent troubled me. Something seemed to have affected the balloon's buoyancy, yet the sensors showed no signs of interference. No electromagnetic spikes, nothing beyond the strange altitude changes. I sent the sky footage to my supervisor, but the file was grainy and distorted, particularly around the object. It appeared as if the camera sensor struggled to focus, with light bending unusually around the mysterious shape. By the next day, the footage had disappeared. My supervisor claimed it was lost during transfer, citing a server error or hard drive crash. When I requested backup files, none could be found. The following week, I contacted the FAA to inquire about any unusual reports or radar logs from that time. The knock came just past midnight, a soft but urgent tapping on my front door. I'd been out late and exhausted, not expecting anyone. When I opened the door, two men stood there, black suits, dark glasses, expressionless faces like something from a movie. They didn't introduce themselves, just stated they needed to check my yard. Confused and half asleep, I wondered why. A routine inspection for safety concerns, one explained in a calm but firm voice. Something felt off. No badges, no IDs, but something in their demeanor suggested arguing wouldn't be wise. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. Cold air pressed against my skin, fog rolling in from the nearby river. Streetlights flickered dimly. The neighborhood was silent. No cars, just distant dog barks. They moved quickly. One headed toward the backyard, scanning everything. The other watched me closely. I tried peering over the fence, but saw only my garden, old shed, and a few bushes. Minutes passed. Suddenly, he called me over, but instructed, "Please stay inside." When I asked why, he simply replied, "Standard procedure." Back inside, a strange knot formed in my stomach. Near the window, I watched through thickening fog. The blurry light made everything hazy. They pulled out heavy black bags, like forensic evidence containers. One carefully approached something near the shed and began wrapping it up. Something small that I couldn't identify. This wasn't like any routine inspection I'd ever experienced. Earlier that day, the weather balloon launch had seemed completely normal. No unknown objects detected, no unusual flight traffic. But now, standing here watching these mysterious men, I couldn't shake the feeling something extraordinary was happening. I kept thinking about the smooth, silver dot I'd seen hovering silently during the balloon launch. No one else had reported seeing it. Now, these men were collecting something from my yard in the dead of night. Sometimes when I look at the clouds, I wonder if that silent watcher is still out there, waiting and watching. I was out on the ridge just after midnight, chasing the perfect astrophotography shot. As a photography major, I've spent years finding solace in capturing the vastness of the night sky. This late October night was crystal clear and bone-chillingly cold, the kind of night where stars seem to pierce through the darkness with stunning clarity. About 20 minutes from my place in northern Vermont, I'd found this secluded dirt path leading to an isolated ridge, cleary, eng. No streetlights, no distractions, just me, my camera, and the infinite expanse above. I was using an old Canon AE1 loaded with expired Kodak Ektachrome from a thrift store, a film camera that demands patience and deliberation. My setup was precise. Tripod steady, camera positioned to capture star trails circling Polaris, settings dialed in at 30-second exposures and ISO 600. The ridge faced east, offering a perfect vantage point. Film photography has always been my meditation, forcing me to slow down and truly observe. After an hour of shooting, I packed up and headed home.